Hey folks, welcome to the Dark Horse Podcast live stream number 150 some large digit.
Yeah, 56.
56,
156.
see? No, it's not, I was thinking it was higher than that, but 156. It's definitely...
Unless I failed to increase it. It's 156.
It's 156.
Wow, it is 2023 and we are off to a roaring start. What number is it again?
156.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Well, here we are.
Here we are. Today we are going to talk a bit about... Can we even say the word at this point, or is it still Voldemort?
No, I believe we can say the word.
We can say the word?
I think if we pronounce it in British, then we're safe.
So today we might be talking about ivermectin. That wasn't British.
No, I don't know what that was.
I
was going to say ivermectin, which I don't think is how the Brits pronounce it. But
just
it's plausible. As long as there are no Brits watching, I think it'll do.
Okay. I thought you meant an accent as opposed to a different pronunciation. But I can't... Like, it doesn't have enough... I don't even know. Can we start over?
Ivermectin?
This is going to be the thing that finally cancels us.
Yes. Finally.
Yeah.
To
Yanks.
many people's great relief and others tremendous horror.
That was the wrong two. I thought you were going to say two Yanks. Finally pushed
Two Yanks finally pushed it
too far.
A bit too far.
Indeed. Okay, so we're going to talk about ivermectin a little bit, and then some organizations that seem to have lost the plot. The Red Cross, the American Museum of Natural History, a biological organization, which you went to the conference of.
Yes, I did.
Somehow.
The biology conference.
Yeah, you didn't actually go to a biology conference. You went to Austin to talk to
Joe Rogan, of course.
Awesome Joe Rogan.
The awesome Joe Rogan. But I did go to a biology
conference. And the
conference.
hotel you're at happened to be hosting a biology conference.
Crashed a biology conference.
Yes, you did.
Yes,
you did. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're also going to talk about fourth grade me trying not to lose the plot at the end.
All right. No idea where that's going.
No. Okay, but first some logistics. You find and follow Dark Horse now on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We now have accounts there, and we've got some awesome people monitoring those accounts and putting up content. And there will be announcements of things like schedule changes and blasts from the past and
blasphemy from the past, even.
Probably.
Yeah.
We follow these live streams with live Q&As, Q's and A's. You can ask questions at darkhorsemissions.com. We also are streaming on Odyssey. Is that correct, Mr. Producer Man? Okay. We are streaming on Odyssey, and that is where the chat is live. If you're watching us live, you can go over there. And we encourage you to check out our book, Hunter Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, my Substack, naturalselections.substack.com, where this week I wrote about connecting and my desire to befriend seals, among other things.
Approving seals.
I guess I need them to be approving if I'm to befriend them, yes.
Of course, I'll let everyone fill in their own punchline on that.
Yes, indeed. We have a terrific store, darkhorsestore.org, with lots of awesome products, including the Lie to a Tyrant hoodie, which we got a couple in the mail, and I presented it to our younger, awesome 16-year-old son, and he worked at school.
He did?
Yeah.
As long as he doesn't take us to be tyrants, I think it's good.
No, he looked at it, it's like solid. Yeah, it's solid. Got it. Okay. And we are, of course, supported by you, our audience. We appreciate you subscribing to the channels, both YouTube and Odyssey, and the Clips channel, Dark Horse Podcast Clips on both of those, and wherever it is that you are watching or listening to the podcast, be it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever, and sharing, subscribing, liking, and sharing when you feel like you should be doing so. YouTube, of course, demonetized us a long time ago at this point, and as such, we appreciate any financial support you can throw at us. We have Patreons where there are active communities, and you also can get access to a monthly Q&A online, and Brett has conversations on his, one of which was this morning, the second of which this month will be tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Pacific, and they are fantastic. You can also there get access to our Discord server, where conversations are ongoing, and include things like karaoke and book clubs. And of course, we have sponsors for whom we are very, very grateful. And we do not accept sponsorship from corporations that make products or offer services that we actually don't vouch for. So you can be sure that if we are reading ads, as we do at the top of each live stream, 3 ads, then we have actually vetted and approved these products. So without further ado, our current sponsors. And the first sponsors for 2023 include the House of Macadamias. They're brand new to us. Nuts. That's right. House of Macadamias makes nuts. They grow and they package and they put into some remarkable forms macadamia nuts. Tree nuts, which includes not just macadamias, but also pecans, walnuts, cashews, almonds, pistachios, and more, are delicious and nutritious. They are generally high in fat and low in carbohydrates, which is increasingly understood to be both satiating and good for you, despite what the food pyramid may have told you.
Also, yum.
That's the delicious part.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. It was included there. Yeah. Highfalutin language.
Delicious, and that's super highfalutin.
It's semi-highfalutin. It's moderately falutin.
It's moderately falutin, as are macadamias.
No, they're, I don't know, high and awesome.
High and awesome falutin, yes. But each species of nut is different, and for many of us, and for good reason, macadamias are the best. Macadamia nuts take a very long time to grow, however, and are rare, representing only about 1% of nuts in the marketplace, and because they are both rare and highly sought after, they have the dubious distinction of being the world's most expensive nut. But between the taste and the health benefits, they're worth it. They have fewer carbohydrates than most other nuts, for instance, half of what cashews or pistachios have, and 2/3 of what almonds have, which makes them the perfect snack for breaking a daily fast and controlling blood glucose. They're also uniquely rich in omega-7s, including especially palmitoleic, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, palmitoleic acid, an unsaturated fat that has been linked to natural collagen production, fat loss, and heart health. And I will say here, just as an aside, I actually went and looked at, I did a little literature review on macadamia nuts and what people are finding out about them. And it is a burgeoning field of research because macadamia nuts really do seem to be quite remarkable in many ways, quite good for you. And House of Macadamias, which is our newest sponsor, is a company obsessed with making this amazing food accessible to everyone. They have partnered with more than 90 farmers in Africa and now make one-of-a-kind vegan, keto, and paleo stacks. These include their white chocolate dipped macadamias and dark chocolate dipped macadamias, plus a delicious assortment of bars made with 45% macadamia nuts, including mocha, salted caramel, and chocolate coconut. And they're all great. And they have simply delicious salted macadamias made with Namibian sea salt. They're amazing. We love them, and we think that you will too. So our House of Macadamias recommends House of Macadamias for all of your macadamic needs. Looking for something to nourish and energize you while in pursuit of the truth or the next summit? Go to www.houseofmacadamias.com. That's House of MACADAMIAS.com and use code DARKHORSE for a 20% discount on your first order.
All right. And with that, we go to our second sponsor. And our second sponsor is 8 Sleep. And I must tell you, while I was on the road, I missed the ability to control the temperature of the bed just so.
You weren't able to turn your bed into an ice cube?
No, I had to use the room temperature, which is just not a good substitute.
Yeah.
It's just not as effective.
No, 8 Sleep is fabulous.
Yes, they are. All right. So good sleep is a game changer. And the 8 Sleep pod helps you get good sleep. As we discussed in the sleep chapter of the Hunter-Gatherer's Guide, intelligent life that found its way to Earth might be surprised by a lot of what it found on our planet, but likely not by the fact of sleep or dreams. Sleep is necessary. Without good sleep, we are destined to be unhealthy and unproductive. Consistent good sleep can help you reduce the likelihood of serious health issues, decrease the risk of heart disease, lower blood pressure, and even reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. But more than 30% of Americans struggle with sleep, and temperature is one of the main reasons. Couples who sleep together often have different optimal sleep temperatures, Heather, which can cause all sorts of disagreements. Also, Heather, 8 Sleep allows fine-tuned temperature regulation for both people. Having a cool room and a warm bed is a luxury that 8 Sleep makes easy to obtain.
Not that you want that.
No. The Pod Pro cover by 8 Sleep is the only sleep technology that dynamically cools and heats each side of the bed to maintain the optimal sleeping temperature for what your body needs. With the Pod, you can start sleeping as cool as 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so nice, or as hot as 110, yikes. Not that we recommend the extremes, though.
Some of us recommend close to one of those extremes.
Close to one of those extremes, but it's good.
My God. It goes down to negative 10 units, and that's not temperature units, and you started off at negative 8? My God, it's so cold.
But, all right.
But you can do this and not antagonize your partner, and that's amazing.
And not antagonize your partner. Right, exactly. The temperature of the cover will adjust each side of the bed based on your sleep stages, biometrics, bedroom temperature, reacting dynamically to create the optimal sleeping environment. 8 Sleep users fall asleep 32% faster, reduce sleep interruptions by 40%, and get 30% more deep sleep on average. With more restful sleep overall, you may see improvements in physical recovery, hormone regulation, and mental clarity. Finally, the alarm feature, which I used only this morning, which can wake you with temperature change and or slight chest level vibrations, is so much gentler than any standard alarm. We were both a little skeptical, and now we are totally sold. We are surprised by how much we appreciate this bed. Go to 8sleep.com/darkhorse to check out the Pod Pro cover and save $150 at checkout. 8 Sleep currently ships within the USA, Canada, and the UK, and select countries in the EU and Australia. And I have to say, I do not know why, but my phone, doesn't matter what I set the alarm to, it wakes up with that same blaring thing. I can't adjust.
You're not talking about the 8 Sleep app, you're talking about your phone.
Yeah, so anyway, I was dreading it. I had to get up early this morning, and I realized, well, I've got the perfect solution right here, so I did not use the phone.
No, your side of the bed just vibrated lightly, and you wake up. Earthquake?
Nice.
No. And I mean, just like with the temperature, you can set it to vibrate not at all up through 10 level. I haven't tried that. I don't know.
Yeah,
what
it's really
that
not
would be
necessary.
like. Yeah, 1 or 2
5 is
does.
plenty, and it's not
2
jarring.
is fine. Yeah. All right. Our final sponsor this week is Seed. Seed is a company focused on bacteria and the microbiome, and they have a terrific probiotic called DS01 Daily Symbiotic. I always prefer eating real food to taking pills, but I have to say I really love this product. There are a lot of things that you can do to enhance your health. Our sign-off here at Dark Horse includes 3 of them. Be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside. But a lot is hidden in those words. What, for instance, constitutes good food? Good food is real food, whole food that has been alive recently and was grown with care and conditions as ancient as possible given the constraints of the 21st century. But even many people who eat such a diet are missing something. We contain multitudes. Every individual human contains so many other organisms, some of which may harm us, but many of which exist with us in harmony. We need them. This is why probiotics can be an important tool in a healthy lifestyle, even if you eat nutrient-dense food and avoid processed foods and sugar. But not all probiotics are created equally. Seed's DS01 Daily Symbiotic is a broad-spectrum 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic. It contains 24 distinct probiotic strains in a 2-in-1 capsule that protects the probiotics until they hit the colon, where they are most effective. If you've taken a probiotic before and never felt a difference, it's likely because the good bacteria weren't surviving your GI tract. Seed is designed differently, and that's why it works. Seed's Daily Symbiotic supports gut, skin, and heart health and micronutrient synthesis. We've heard from several people who've used Seed and report improvements to their digestive function in 24 to 48 hours. Start a new healthy habit today. Visit seed.com/darkhorse and use code darkhorse to redeem 20% off your first month of Seed's DS01 Daily Symbiotic. That's seed.com, SEED./darkhorse, and use code darkhorse at checkout. All right. That is it.
That's the business.
For the sponsorships. That's for the business. And we're going to start off today talking about the mechanism of action of ivermectin.
What? Mechanism of action of ivermectin. I remember a particularly nasty interaction where one of our detractors took me to task for admitting that I did not know by what mechanism ivermectin seemed to be working, and she said,
and if you don't know, it must not work.
Right, exactly. How can you say that something works if you don't know the mechanism of action? And of course, that's not how science works at all. You can absolutely know that something works and not know the mechanism of action. But
and frankly, such a mechanistic approach to science is almost always hand in hand with a reductionist approach, and almost always revealing of a relatively small mind who may generate sort of bricks in the wall that already exist in science, but is very unlikely to discover truths. It is 100% not the way that science has to work. There is good mechanistic science out there, as I think this paper we're going to talk about today reveals. But the idea that if you don't know mechanism, you can't know the thing is functional, no.
Right, and any fool knows this, right? I mean, how many games of ultimate frisbee have taken place entirely on a field with nobody on it who could explain what the relationship is between the Bernoulli effect and the way the damn thing flies, right? No, you just know how to throw the frisbee. Right? So, yeah, knowing how it works is not essential, but it's fantastic when it happens because it allows you to go that much farther. You can extrapolate in ways that you could not necessarily otherwise extrapolate. So anyway, it's great that a mechanism of action seems to have emerged.
Indeed. So we ran across this on Dr. McCullough's Substack. He published a short piece called Ivermectin's Mechanism of Action Against SARS-CoV-2 described shame on the hospital systems, shame on the hospital systems that systematically denied patients and their begging families this FDA-approved Nobel Prize-winning wonder drug. He is he's referring to this paper that came out in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, which you can show on my screen if you like, Zach. Just recently, it's actually end of 2022. And the title is SARS-CoV-2 Spike Protein Induces Hemagglutination, Implications for COVID-19 Morbidities and Therapeutics and for Vaccine Adverse Effects. Okay. I think we had talked about me just sharing a couple of excerpts from the paper before we talk about it.
Yes, well, there was one other thing that was, I don't remember if it's in the paper, it was certainly in McCullough's brief treatment of it, which I wanted to remind people of, because there's been so much effort put into confusing people about ivermectin, whether or not it works for SARS-CoV-2. But I just wanted to highlight this piece of information, which is that ivermectin was known to have broad-scale effects against RNA viruses generally. There's a large number of RNA viruses in which it has been shown to be useful. So to the extent that people are scratching their heads over why a dewormer has an effect on SARS-CoV-2, that's not what it is. This is a highly bioactive molecule that has effects, yes, on parasitic worms. Also appears to have effects counteracting RNA viruses, of which SARS-CoV-2 is of course one.
Yep.
So not
a
that...
lot of them. And we wrote that into the piece that we published on my Substack as well. And it is a kind of a wonder drug, and there's a reason that it was on the WHO's list of essential medicines, and that's not Roger Daltrey's doing, that's the other WHO, and that's the WHO that has since, taken out.
Where did Roger Daltrey come from?
Well, until 2020, when you said the WHO, most people who weren't associated with the World Health Organization or in that sphere somehow would think, Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey and such. But, this isn't a sleight of hand on our part, going some rock stars think that ivermectin works. No, the WHO, it's still on their list of essential medicines, and I believe it's back on a number of other health agencies' lists of recommended medicines for COVID too, but I did not look into that.
It is actually, I checked before the podcast, I have to delve deeper to see exactly what it means, but it is actually on the NIH site. So
it was on the NIH, so be careful there, because it was on the NIH site for a while, but they basically said, yeah, but not really.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's something
for research or something like that. But anyway, it's beside the point. I will point out that in terms of, yes, you can know that something works before you know how it is that it works, that there's also something to be said for the integrative aspect of this, right? You have a bacterium found in Japanese soil. I believe a golf course is the original source.
No, I didn't know that.
But in any case,
that makes it weirder in a way.
It does make it weirder.
Yeah, so there's selective effects from the stuff you have to put on grass to make it into a golf course.
Either that, or it's very tolerant, and Satoshi Omura was at the golf course because it's a place that brings people. I don't know exactly what the explanation would be, but the thing that I would point out is there's bound to be a fascinating ecological story underlying the question of why this bacterium has effects against a broad range of creatures. In other words, if you studied the bacterium instead of studying the compound, you might find that there's a unique environment in which fending off these things is particularly relevant to some story I think that we don't yet know. And I would love to hear that story. How is it that some creature inconspicuous as this one came to have all of these effects that we find so useful?
Right. And without understanding why, or even what many of the effects were, the discovery by Umura won him a Nobel Prize back in
2015.
So not that long ago, actually, even though the discovery was many decades before. That is as often the case with maybe always the case with the Nobel, right? At least in physiology and medicine, that the award gets granted often decades after the discovery in question. I think all of the sciences, maybe peace not so much, and maybe literature not so much, although literature is
Yeah. Neither here nor there.
Okay, so this article, published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, finds that, and you may show my screen if you like, Zach. This is just the second half of the abstract. The results of these experiments were, first, that spike protein from these 4 lineages of SARS-CoV-2 induced HA, which is hemagglutination assay. I want to say that has to be assay, although the way they've got this, that's weird. Omicron-induced HA at a significantly lower threshold concentration of spike protein than the 3 prior lineages and was much more electropositive on its central spike protein region. IBM, that's ivermectin, blocked HA when added to red blood cells prior to spike protein and reversed hemagglutination when added afterwards. These results validate and extend prior findings on the role of glycan binding as a viral spike protein in COVID-19. They furthermore suggest therapeutic options using competitive glycan binding agents such as ivermectin and may help elucidate rare serious adverse effects associated with COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, which use spike protein as the generated antigen. So that's highly technical, as abstracts will tend to be, but it clears up a little bit with a few more sections. And for those, well, I can just so hemagglutinating property basically just means clumping. So this clumping of red blood cells. This hemagglutinating property of SARS-CoV-2 has important clinical consequences. First, with trillions of red blood cells each circulating through narrow pulmonary capillaries about once per minute, even small dynamically aggregating and disaggregating red blood cell clumps, as can form even in the absence of pathogens, can impede red blood cell oxygenation. Peripheral ischemia, endothelial damage, and vascular occlusion are indeed frequently observed in serious cases of COVID-19, as reviewed in these references. In COVID-19 patients, damaged endothelium of pulmonary capillaries is often observed, adjoining relatively intact alveoli, while hypoxemia is manifested despite normal breathing mechanics. These morbidities of COVID-19 parallel those of severe malaria, in which clumping of parasite-infected red blood cells to other red blood cells via I don't remember what that is, terminal residues and endothelial cytoadhesion also often result in fatal outcomes. So they are saying this looks similar to malaria. We now are seeing what SARS-CoV-2 is doing, which is it's causing red blood cells to clump over hemagglutination. And we, the authors of this paper, are putting together that thing that we are seeing with the clinical observations of how it is that people suffering from bad cases of COVID are manifesting in terms of their symptoms.
So I don't know if you want to continue there or I want to add some other things. So to translate some of that, it is counterintuitive that capillary beds are actually basically composed of arterioles that are so tiny that basically the blood cells go through close to single file, and any clumping causes these things not to be able to get through. And what they're saying is that results in damage from these tissues not being perfused with oxygen, and any tissue that is denied oxygen long enough basically ends up dying, which they're saying matches some of the pathologies that we see from severe COVID infection. And they also say that the lungs are failing to engage in gas exchange even though the mechanics are working. And the basic point is, in order for gas exchange to work, blood has to get right to this very cusp of contact with the air that you're breathing. And to the extent that the capillary beds in your alveoli are not perfused with blood cells because the blood cells can't get in single file to get into those tiny little arterioles, it's not working. So they're not presumably dumping carbon dioxide and picking up oxygen, which then results in the hypoxia that was talked about so much earlier in the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, just a semantic point.
Yep.
So the heart, as mammals, we have a fully four-chambered heart in which we have blood coming out of the heart and going to systemically, coming back in, and then going to the other side of the heart and going out to the lungs and then back. And in both of those circuits, be it out to the body and then back, or out to the lungs and then back, you basically go out on the biggest muscles, the arteries, and then as they get smaller, there's no real category difference. And then they become arterioles, and then at the point that they are at their smallest, where the blood cells may in fact be going single file, we call those capillary beds. We don't really call them arterioles, at least over in comparative biology land, where I'm never dissected a human, but dissected a lot of cats. And then as they come out of the capillary beds, veins, as they get bigger, and veins are under much less pressure, and so the sides of them are much less thick, and they tend to you end up with these sort of pools in your veins potentially if you weren't otherwise very healthy, like in a way that you don't really get pools in your arteries because the blood coming directly out of your heart before it hits capillaries is under very low pressure, but after it's down in the capillary beds, it's coming back more sluggishly and also deoxygenated. And the thing about the alveoli of the lungs is that basically the lungs, the pulmonary circuit out of the heart is a way to get the blood back into oxygenated state, right? So the pulmonary artery is the least oxygenated vessel in the body, the least oxygenated big vessel in the body, even though in general the arteries are the blood is pumping fast, it's full of oxygen, but only if it's recently come back from the lungs and it's now going out to the body.
Right. And so I did screw up. I used arterial, or I said capillary, but in any case, it's amazing how well this actually fits a lot of the stuff that was discussed in COVID. The hypoxia is basically, if you imagine that what you did, even if your red blood cells are just a little bit tending to stick together, that's enough to keep them from flowing through those capillary beds the way they're supposed to. And so you can imagine they put that pulse ox thing on your finger, and basically what it's reading is that to the extent that oxygenated blood landed in your tissues, like the ones in your fingers, it burned its oxygen and then wasn't in a position to go back and play another round of the game. And so you would see this. Now, what I don't hear explained in here is why you'll remember that the syndrome was called something like happy hypoxics. You had people who had such low oxygenation that they should have been on the floor, and yet they didn't even register to themselves that they were struggling to oxygenate. So I'm waiting for that explanation.
Yeah.
But anyway, so far interesting.
Yeah. So a few more bits from this paper. This is just something that we've talked about before, but ivermectin achieved Nobel Prize honored distinction for success against global parasitic scourges, but is of disputed efficacy in the treatment of COVID-19, as indicated, for example, by the disparity in the conclusions of this editorial cited and its key cited meta-analysis cited. So this is just so these authors, like all the authors trying to publish, all the scientists trying to publish on COVID right now, who are in any way dissidents from the mainstream narrative, have to do do a little bit of this, like, oh, but the vaccines are great. Oh, but things don't work when we've been told they don't work, even if they really kind of do. And so there's always a little, there's ways that you can get in the critique, and this is them doing that. The conclusions of the editorial that they cite are we need to stop using drugs that don't work, and then the meta-analysis, and that includes ivermectin, and the meta-analysis that editorial cites finds that it does work. So even the medical journals that are supposed to be that seem to be doing the right thing are citing things backwards throughout.
Well,
the
you can.
pandemic.
I guess what you're saying is you can detect the massive force that wants to tell you what you can and cannot say, even in a paper that's reporting something here that's clearly a vindication of those who've been demonized.
But this is them going like, yeah, look at what these guys did. But you have to. I'm not going to do it here. Like I did before we came on camera. You have to go and look like, oh, okay. So this is them revealing something that to the casual reader won't be revealed, but it's in here. Okay, so sorry about the scrolling. Where's the next thing? Hemagglutinating. Okay? So that's just the tendency of the red blood cells to stick together. The hemagglutinating inducing activity of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, which is especially potent for Omicron, raises questions as to potential risks of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, which use spike protein as the generated antigen, even though serious adverse effects linked to spike protein, such as myocarditis, are rare. Detectable levels of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and S1 in serum or plasma have been found to persist for as long as 50 days following such vaccinations. The possibility that spike protein migrating into the bloodstream could in rare cases prompt such hemagglutinating-associated adverse events is suggested, for example, by a study of 1,006 subjects experiencing adverse events after receiving a Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna mRNA vaccination, which found a significant degree of red blood cell aggregation in the blood of 948 of those subjects. 948 of 1,006. These risks may be increased for younger age groups, with 301 adolescents of 13 to 18 years of age who received 2 doses of the BioNTech mRNA COVID-19 vaccine in one study having a 29.2% rate of cardiac adverse events, ranging from tachycardia or palpitation to myopericarditis.
Wow. Yeah. So what they're saying, I should say there's a piece of conservatism in here that doesn't that needs to be highlighted, which is that, yes, the spike protein has been found up to 50 days, but it's actually been found longer than that, and we really don't know at what rate it dissipates.
I remember, I know you're going somewhere, persists for as long as 50 days following such vaccinations. I did not click through on these links, but I remember us talking in an earlier Dark Horse about some of the research that was finding that it was persisting, and the research was saying, up to 50 days or something like that, and when you go into the paper, it actually says, well, we actually just stopped looking after 50 days. So it's not that they're saying, and then it's gone. They're saying, and then we don't know, which is an important distinction. I don't know that's the case here, but it may well be.
It is also the case that people should remember the spike protein is not supposed to be free-floating after these vaccines anyway, right? It's supposed to be sticking in the membrane of the cells that have been transfected, and those cells are not supposed to be anywhere and everywhere in the body. They're supposed to be limited to the deltoid and the lymphatic system associated with it, where the antigen-presenting cells were supposed to pass it off to the immunological cells, the Bs and T cells that learn the formula. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so the point is we're talking about design failure after design failure. The choice of spike protein itself dangerous. Why? Well, know at least one reason why, which is that it causes
it's hemagglutinating inducing.
It's right. And so choice of spike protein, the fact that spike protein is showing up independent of the cells that were transfected, all of these things are suggesting a kind of blood disorder that is mimicking malaria, and there's a whole other story to get into, but nonetheless, the idea that this is creating this overall malfunction of the red blood cell half of the system is profoundly disturbing, and the mechanism of action, therefore, I don't know if you had a piece you wanted to read or if we should just describe it in plain English.
Of ivermectin?
Yeah.
We'll do this first, and then we'll translate it in English.
Good.
Ivermectin, a macrocyclic lactone, indicated to bind strongly to multiple glycan sites on SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, blocked hemagglutination when added to red blood cells prior to spike protein, and reversed hemagglutination when added afterwards, which suggests therapeutic options for COVID-19 treatment using this drug or other competitive glycan binding agents. So that's not, that's in a dish, right? But ivermectin blocks hemagglutination before exposure, and it reverses hemagglutination after exposure to spike protein in a dish. Suggesting that, given that, we now know that one of, if not the primary mechanism of action by which SARS-CoV-2 is being damaged is hemagglutination. And we know separately that ivermectin, and it's not the only one that does it, but that ivermectin is both incredibly safe and, effective in blocking or reversing hemagglutination. Hey, it works against COVID.
Yeah, it works against COVID. Also potentially works against vaccine adverse events that are caused by spike protein. I will say it is, if this paper holds, it is a validation of one of the hypotheses that we explored early on, that the mechanism of action of ivermectin might be the binding of spike protein. That might be why it has general applicability. And another thing
I don't think it's... But that's not what's going on here. It's not binding spike protein.
The question is, so you also recall that with Dr. Malone, on the episode that I did with him and Steve Kirsch, we talked about the fact that the spike protein is covered in these sugars.
Yeah.
Right? It's covered in these sugars, presumably as effectively a cloaking mechanism. Right? So if it is pulling these sugars out of the blood and therefore being encrusted in something that doesn't trigger the immune system, that allows it to evade the surveillance that happens there. And so anyway, it's interesting how this result seems to line up with some of the speculating that we did about why things functioned the way they did early on in the pandemic before this stuff was known. So it's kind of cool.
It's very cool. And, it's not misinformation, it's not disinformation. It's probably still malinformation.
Because it's true and it makes you distrust your government?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure what we can do about that. I mean,
better government.
Better. Wow. Yeah. You said a mouthful. Right. Yeah. No, so if we had trustworthy government, then we could at least be emotionally disturbed at things that made you distrust it. But with a distrustful government, it's hard to know if you're just distrusting it because it sucks.
Right. Yeah. You can't know if you're paranoid if they're actually after you.
Exactly. It's very hard to diagnose paranoia when they're out to get you. Yeah.
Yes. All right.
All right. So, yeah. I mean, let's just say this is exciting for more than one reason. A, it's beginning to fill in the piece of the puzzle. B, it's operationalizable.
Yeah.
Right. To the extent that
which is cool. Mechanism is cool. We don't need it often, but it's cool when you got it.
But it's cool. It's cool when you got it. And actually, I remember. I don't think Pierre said this on the podcast, but he certainly said it to me and maybe us privately. That as he was discovering that ivermectin was not only a great preventative for COVID, a great treatment for COVID, but it also worked for long COVID and adverse events, he was like, this kind of sucks because I feel like a one-trick pony. I keep pointing people to this stuff, but it works. And anyway, this begins to explain why it is that it's just sort of generally useful in this, because spike protein is such a large part of the pathology associated with both the disease and the so-called vaccine.
Well, and I think I read it, but I glossed over it because it was a highly technical paragraph. But they also say the hemagglutinating property of SARS-CoV-2 is much reduced in Omicron. And so quite separately, I don't know if he said it publicly, but to us, Dr. Corin, we got Omicron a year ago. He said, yeah, you could take the ivermectin, but it seems to be not as effective with Omicron. And that is also consistent with this finding that Omicron has a lower hemagglutinating tendency than the other strains.
Isn't it crazy when all of the lines of evidence line up?
Yeah. Okay, should we talk about since we're talking about blood, let's talk about the Red Cross.
Oh, hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Oh, hi. And Fairfax, he loves to talk about the Red Cross.
It's our semi-domesticated animal.
Indeed. Okay, where do I even start here? The Red Cross. I'm gonna figure out what I'm doing here. Okay. I will link to the page, but I'm just going to show you a series of screenshots. With regard to things that are coming up on the Red Cross site at the moment. They have LGBTQ plus donors. This page is supported by the American Red Cross LGBTQ plus team member resource group. Learn about federal regulations related to blood donation by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and gender nonconforming individuals. American Red Cross values. If anyone watching doesn't know what the American Red Cross is, which I find dubious, they are a lot of things. But in the United States anyway, the primary way that Americans end up running into them is with blood drives. They are, I think, by far the largest collector of blood, often encouraging people to donate blood, and actually you can leave my screen up, and therefore distributor of blood. And of course, back in the 80s, when I think most of these corrections to who could donate when were happening in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic. Epidemic. I don't know. When AIDS came on the scene and had everyone terrified, and then in short order people were beginning to get sort of a handle on who's really at risk, there were, of course, restrictions put in place in terms of who could donate blood. And one of those restrictions was men who have sex with men, which we'll see this here in a minute. MSM is the acronym, the abbreviation they're using. Men who have sex with men and have had sex with men within the last 3 months are not allowed to donate, are on a temporary hold. And if you are a man who has sex with men but hasn't had sex with any men in the previous 3 months, then you're allowed to donate. Because many sexually transmitted diseases stay in the blood and are particularly suited to transmission through male homosexual sex. Okay, so American Red Cross values, such as the background. Our top priority, they say, is the safety of our volunteer blood donors and the patients in need of life-saving blood products. Our employees and volunteers are trained to be sensitive to the needs of all potential blood donors. The American Red Cross believes blood donation eligibility should not be determined by methods that are based on sexual orientation. We are committed to working with partners towards achieving this goal. We understand that there is a difference between biological sex and gender. No, they don't. The Food and Drug Administration guidance, revised recommendations for reducing the risk of human immunodeficiency virus transmission by blood and blood products, states, quote, in the context of the donor history questionnaire, FDA recommends that male or female gender be taken to be self-identified and self-reported. In a linked document, in which they're talking about what the rules are supposed to be, they're suggesting, and everyone who's collecting blood in the U.S. this is from the FDA, has to abide by these guidelines, that blood donors must defer for 3 months from the most recent sexual contact a man who has had sex with another man during the past 3 months, and a woman who must defer for 3 months from the most recent sexual contact a female who has had sex during the past 3 months with a man who has had sex with another man in the past 3 months. So those are the guidelines, supposedly as they stand, and yet, back on the Red Cross's site, under men who have sex with men, they say, again, the FDA guidance, what I just read, defer for 3 months from the most recent sexual contact. A man who has had sex with another man during the past 3 months. All U.S. blood collection organizations must follow this federal requirement. But the Red Cross continues. The Red Cross recognizes the hurt this policy has caused to many in the LGBTQ plus community and believes blood donation eligibility should not be determined by methods that are based upon sexual orientation. We are committed to working with partners to achieve this goal. And when you go into their frequently asked questions, I'm a trans woman, and I have not been eligible to donate because my assigned sex at birth was male, and I had sex with a man. Can I donate blood? Individuals who identify as female and have sex with a man may be eligible to donate blood, if all other blood donation eligibility criteria are applicable. If an individual was previously deferred from donating blood due to being a man who has sex with men, that person will need to call the donor blood support center, etc., etc. All you have to do, if you are a man who has sex with men and has been actively having sex with men, if you want to donate blood and thus potentially corrupt the blood supply, is walk in, and as long as you have not tried this before and admitted that you're actually a man and said, nope, I'm a woman, then they will let you donate blood.
So it's the ultimate proof that this entire societal disorder, whatever it is, amounts to the prioritization of the perceptual world over reality.
And not, yes, so that's the postmodern part, right? And then it's a prioritization of the perceptual world of mentally ill people, right? Like, it's one thing to have gender dysphoria and feel like I really, in order to feel my most true self, I need to present as the sex that I am not. It is quite another thing to say, nope, I'm a dude. Not. I never felt like it either, but like, it's a different, that is a mental disorder. Furthermore, if you go into the Red Cross knowing what everyone knows about the ways that things like monkeypox are transmitted, and you say, yep, I'm a woman, yep, I've had sex with men, and yes, I was assigned male at birth, but I'm actually a woman today, and you donate blood knowing that, you're a psychopath.
Well, I won't say that. I don't know. People are confused in a lot of different ways. People take advantage of these confusions in other ways. But I will say, the problem is that this actually, in the same era that we have been told what we absolutely must do, for example, take an experimental gene therapy in order to protect vulnerable people, even if we ourselves do not believe ourselves to be vulnerable to COVID based on well-understood patterns of transmission.
Oh, and by the way, it doesn't protect people.
Right, it doesn't. But the point is, at best, they thought it did. And if they did think it did, and that's what was supposed to have morally required us, because protecting other people was the motivating factor, why is protecting other people not the motivating factor here? And the answer is, look, if you are a biological male and you have had sex with other men, you can't donate blood, right? Not for a period of 3 months, right? That's simple. Nobody's asking you to out yourself. The point is, here's the guideline. Don't donate blood if you don't qualify. Here's how you'll know. And the point is, in order
it's caused hurt.
In order to humor this alternative perspective, and I'm not arguing that there is not a gentleman's agreement level of decency. If somebody has transitioned and they wish to be, called female, fine. The point is that this does not change things when you get to the doctor's office. It does not change things when you go to donate blood. There's a physical reality, and that's not about courtesy, right? That's about other things. In this case, it's about the transmission of a communicable disease.
Yep, sure is. And here, this felt a little bit related. I didn't put it up yet, so people will probably remember Dylan Mulvaney, the very talented young man who less than a year ago decided that transitioning publicly on TikTok was actually going to be the way to acquire the fame that he had clearly so long desired, and now has days of growth. And it's quite something. And has recently undergone facial feminization surgery and has not yet revealed the new feminized face to the world. But here is the top of a TikTok post. For the new year, let me show it, in which Dylan Mulvaney says, a friendly reminder as we start the new year. Not all trans people desire affirming surgeries or hormones. They are still trans. But when we do, it's a necessity. Please show up for all trans people the way you have showed up for me. Happy New Year. And you can't be perfect always. It is an opt-in, get out of jail free as many times as you want. It's even better than Monopoly's get out of jail free card because you don't have to turn it in once you use it. All you have to do is say, nope, not the sex I actually am, and all the doors open, including the ability to pollute blood supply. Why would we open that door? Why would we do that?
Yeah, and just maddening inconsistency of it. I mean, really, I'm having a hard time getting over a society that, wants to manipulate us with claims that we have obligations to keep other people safe, which, of course, we do have obligations to keep other people safe. But they often, then, as soon as you say, well, yeah, I agree there's a requirement to keep other people safe, then they smuggle in all this stuff that puts them in tremendous danger for no obvious reason.
Well, they also redefine safe, right?
Of course.
And violence.
And everything.
And everything. But, safe means feeling safe.
Yeah.
Right. And that's been being done for a long time, actually. Are you safe and do you feel safe are two reasonable questions. Do you feel safe, and is that the indicator of whether or not you are safe? That is there's a logical problem with that. And some people probably are very, very good having been in lots of different kinds of situations, encountered lots of different kinds of ways that they might actually not be safe. That having those two things, feeling safe and actually being safe, be as tightly coupled as possible. We should all try for that. But some people seem actually interested in decoupling those things as much as possible and of crying about not being safe, shouting from the rooftops about how at risk they are and how if you don't do what they want, they're going to hurl themselves off the roofs. And when in fact there was no threat, why are we letting them rule? Why are we letting them make the decisions?
Yeah, and frankly, it's pretty obvious that this society is not really concerned about safety in any deep way, right? The food supply can tell you that. The quality of the air, microplastics, all of these things are places where tremendously unsafe stuff has been produced in such a way that it impacts the development of children.
Chemicals and
right.
From pharmaceuticals and from insecticides.
So I guess what I would say is that every time that same system, which is obviously indifferent to the harm it does to the right? It's going to try to like you out of this profession rather than address the question of, must we continue to harm children by feeding them stuff that's too soft when they're young, right? It doesn't care about the well-being of kids. So then every time it uses safety as its excuse for taking some new kind of power, I officially don't believe it, right? If it was really interested in safety, it would be behaving differently. And even if it wasn't very good at protecting us, it would at least be consistent in desiring that we do things that are safer. But hell no. I mean, it likes to inflict stuff on us and it basically laughs when we take the bait. Yep. And then it suddenly shouts safety and everybody's supposed to adjust everything about, sort of precautionary principle in the interest of safety, right? Like, what the hell is that?
Yes. We're talking safety, not precaution. Precaution is
right,
totally different.
Precaution, that's dangerous. Yeah. Yeah, you're putting everyone in danger with all that precaution.
Let us do your thinking.
Yeah, safer than that. Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, well, remember the American Natural History Museum?
Oh, I do.
AMNH.
Yes.
American Museum of Natural History. I messed that up. It's the American Museum of Natural History. And they're important and big. It's a lovely museum in New York. They've also got AMNAT, right? The journal, one of the top journals in organismal biology. And of course they have they may not even own anymore. It's certainly went off the rails a long time ago, but the Lay Magazine Natural History, I think that was also AMNH publication for a while. Well, they have, apparently it's 150 years. You can show on the screen here now. Teen Sci Cafe. That's SCI for those who are not watching. That's Teen Science Cafe. They've got events that they are running. And it's brought to my attention that an upcoming event is species jumping viruses. This is a week from now. So you did not know what was coming, but you're about to learn.
Okay.
Teen Sci Cafe at the American Museum of Natural History is offering a little walkthrough on species jumping viruses next Saturday. What do Zika, West Nile, Ebola, HIV, and SARS-CoV-2 all have in common? They are all zoonotic viruses. Viruses that affect other species but evolve to infect humans who can in turn pass viruses to other species. Right there. Join Mark Vallecito, BMD, Senior Field Veterinarian for, wait for it, the EcoHealth Alliance, to learn about how zoonotic viruses jump from one species to another and how scientists are using this information to prepare for and prevent future pandemics.
I can see the lesson now. Okay, typically the virus will go from its host species and it will move to an intermediate species like a ferret badger or a laboratory of virology, and then it will jump into humans from there. And
well, but usually there's like an intermediate vector, I would say, between ferret badger and humans. It involves a popsicle.
The frozen ferret badger steaks. I do remember that trial balloon well.
That was a good one.
That was a good one. I enjoyed that moment.
Yeah. So, EcoHealth Alliance, for those who have forgotten, is. God, I mean, they've had their hand in everything, but they were the pass-through organization, right? They were the pass-through organization where NIH was giving them the grants, and they were shunting the money to the Wuhan lab that was doing the gain-of-function research that is almost certainly where SARS-CoV-2 came from, meaning like not zoonotic, no, not unless you're taking a really big definition of zoonotic there, and clearly that's not what is meant to be applied here. But also then the president or the founder or whatever was put on lead on the trip to China to discover whether or not SARS-CoV-2 could possibly come from the lab or much more likely from the frozen ferret badger steaks. It's basically all of those very, very bad habits of the very, very bad Chinese people. It was us who were talking about lab leak, who were the racist ones.
Right, the ones who thought that this was American work from North Carolina that had been offshored to China because of...
Via the pass-through organization that's EcoHealth Alliance.
Right, yeah. Also, like guys, for example, Peter Daszak, that organization. It's unbelievable that they would try to pawn this off on kids.
Yeah,
right?
14-year-olds and up. They do recommend for Teen Sci Cafe to be 14.
So have you heard Jeffrey Sachs talk about this? Jeffrey Sachs has switched sides in the Origins debate. No. He's been on a tear because actually he got taken advantage of as the head of the panel looking into the questions of Origins. He put Peter Daszak on it. And anyway, he's fascinating to listen to because basically what he discovered was that his entire panel had conflicts of interest in the line. Right? And, this is Jeffrey Sachs. So anyway, it's...
God.
Yeah.
So the American Museum of Natural History is doing this to us. You can put my screen back up. what do Zika, West Nile, Ebola, HIV, and SARS-CoV-2 all have in common? Well, I hope they don't all have the fact that they're not zoonotic in common, right?
Think of that interpretation.
But you click through, and it's just easier for me to use the screenshots. Past events. Teen Sci Cafe, Friendly Neighborhood Coyote. Teen Sci Cafe, Health, Equity, Racial Inequality, and COVID-19. Wait, what? Okay, so let's click through and see what Teen Sci Cafe
This is what the kids call a risky click. Yep.
Health equity, racial inequality, and COVID-19. What do we have to learn from AMNH? This was an event that already happened in November. The COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately affected communities of color across the U.S. But why? How has a legacy of systemic racial inequality in the United States contributed to higher rates of infection and death and lower rates of vaccination in communities of color? Join First Deputy Commissioner and Chief Equity Officer of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Torian Easterling, MD, to find out how the history of medical treatment and mistreatment in the BIPOC community set the stage for inequities during the pandemic and what we can do to reach equity in the future. Couple things.
Oh, yeah.
Couple things. People of color, BIPOC, people of color, whatever, right, have darker skin. It's synonymous. That's a tautology, right? Darker skin is an adaptation to having had ancestors who were more recently harkened from closer related. And it is preventative against skin cancer in places where there is so much sun that their need to make vitamin D at the most optimal rate, the most efficient rate, is not there because you're already getting so much. And so what darker skin does, while also being a preventative against skin cancer, is it reduces the skin's ability to synthesize vitamin D. Which means especially as you, being a dark-skinned person, move farther and farther from the equator and put on more and more clothes because you're farther and farther from the equator, you are much more likely to be vitamin D deficient, even than white-skinned folk who are living farther from the equator and also spending too much time inside and too much time covered up. White skin is more likely to burn, more likely to result in sunburn and therefore skin cancers, but much more efficient at synthesizing vitamin D. We know, and this has nothing to do with racism, that dark skin cannot synthesize vitamin D as effectively, and therefore dark-skinned people who live farther from the equator are more likely to be vitamin D deficient, and we also know that vitamin D deficiency is a factor in bad COVID outcomes.
Both increases the likelihood of contracting COVID and the badness of the interaction with the disease.
Exactly. It's also true that the history of racism in the United States, which is true and real, has created some really terrible events in African American history, like Tuskegee. Right? And so African Americans are appropriately skeptical when the government comes to them and says, trust us, it's safe, do it. Do what we say. In this case, the fact that Black Americans, African Americans, are less vaccinated than their white and Asian counterparts probably was the right move. But American Museum of Natural History is looking to redress that inequity.
Yes. Of course they are. While hiding, they didn't talk about vitamin D, but given the way they set that thing up, basically the idea is the cause of this is racism, rather than the cause of this is a physiological distinction that has a perfectly well understood explanation that has nothing to do with anybody engaging in racism. It has to do with the angle of the sun coming through the atmosphere and the relative risk of cancer versus vitamin D deficiency. And anyway,
trade-offs are racist.
That's a weird perspective.
I mean, I guess the third point, and again, I didn't even know about this thing until after it happened, and we obviously weren't there. We don't know what was said, so I read the blurb that was all that was available publicly. But it's also true that the blurb would seem to be implying that part of the problem was that some demographics didn't have access to the vaccines.
Right.
Everyone had access.
Everybody had access.
It was beyond access. It was forced down our throats at every opportunity, all the time. Advertised everywhere. Come here, go there, anywhere you want. It's available. It's free. It's easy. You must. It was beyond accessible. So the idea that it was racial inequity that kept Black people from getting vaccinated,
no, it's obviously a preposterous explanation. Right? You had to be somewhat clever not to get vaccinated while you weren't paying attention.
Yeah. Okay. We got the Red Cross losing the plot. We got AMNH, which I stupidly called AMANHM first, but I got it.
You did that, and then somehow you dragged me in, and I signed on to that misspelling of the acronym.
Again, I got taken to task. It's not an acronym, just an abbreviation. Acronyms are pronounceable.
Mm.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology.
Wow, that feels strangely familiar.
Yeah. Oh, should we don our masks for this section or not?
I don't.
Oh, did you lose yours?
I have.
So the here we go.
That is that's right side up.
No, I think so. Yeah.
That is.
So I can't do it.
I can't. Yeah, this is not a very useful way to prevent yourself from getting COVID, but it is a useful way of signaling something.
You picked these up at the conference, at the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology conference. Is that right?
I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did.
Well, so
yep.
I mean,
but you also picked this up, which is awesome conference program.
Yes, they gave that to me.
Yeah, and I've begun reading it, and I have some things to share from it. It's actually super awesome in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And then not so awesome in some ways.
So let me just say.
Wait, the pride masks. The pride masks have attracted the cat who has just changed things on my computer by walking.
He is nothing if not proud. So let me just say, I was in Austin, of course, for the Joe Rogan Experience, and my hotel turned out to be the epicenter of this conference, which I did not know was going to be there. And it just sort of emerged around me. And I was, riding the elevators with these people. So this was the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology, which, that's not a conference I ever attended.
It's always at this moment. Like, it's always during the winter break for colleges. And one of our friends in grad school used to always go to it.
It's not one I attended, but it was certainly material. Much of the topic, the subject area is stuff that's squarely in the area we trained in.
Yep. In fact, I'm going to share a few of those. Yeah.
So anyway, it was interesting for me. I will say there was a part of it that was absolutely surreal, because this is a world we used to be embedded in, and now it feels kind of remote. And I was just sort of watching it anthropologically, as you would certainly have done if you had been there. And, I saw like two kinds of people. It was really like, in some ways, really clear that everybody was in one category or the other. There were bedraggled, joyless faculty members, right, who were clearly like laboring under the weight of trying to do this in 2023, and bright-eyed, bushy-tailed graduate students who
haven't gotten the memo that they're going into a field that is dying.
I mean, part of this is
it's not a field, a century. I don't even know, like something that is.
They are training for something that no longer exists. And there's a part of this it's got to just be what it is to be older, right? I was looking at these graduate students and thinking, we were never that young, right? That's a level of young that just, I'm sure we were older than that when we were in graduate school, which can't possibly have been right. But anyway, there was a lot of like excitement among these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed graduate students who were clearly, ready to, confront science.
It's a big conference. And for someone that would have been there first, a big conference, lots of opportunities to meet your future mentor, the guy whose paper you just read and you really want to ask him a question. It's potentially very exciting.
It was, which also allowed me, every time I got on the elevator, I was with folks from this conference, and I was very interested in their elevator pitch for what they do.
So you would ask them, as they didn't recognize you, they know you're a biologist,
right?
And you would say, "Hey, what's it about?"
I'd say, "Oh, are you at the conference? What do you study?" And I would get the little elevator pitch for what they study, and sometimes it was fascinating, and sometimes they struggled to
string three consecutive thoughts together,
convey what it was together. And I would ask a good question, they would look at me like, "What planet did you come from?" And anyway, that sort of thing. But it was sort of fun from that perspective. But I will say, at some point, I became really curious about what was going on in there, and I decided to kind of crash it. And I went into the conference area and discovered that there was a mask mandate, right? Which surprised me.
Hence the pride masks.
Yeah, I mean, these were not the official masks, I will say. There were official masks.
But they were being handed out?
Yes, these were free.
I'm thinking, from what I've looked into of the conference, that I know what group of people was handing out the pride masks.
Yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, pride mask, sure. On the other hand, that mask isn't useful this is a biology conference where they're supposed to be integrating, and that mask is not evidence of their being on board with the latest understanding of this pathogen and how it transmits. So this is basically, it's a choice to signal instead of prevent disease, which, if that had happened at the modern art conference, right, it would have a little different of an implication. But in this case, it was a little bit strange, both the mask mandate itself, right, and the, in any case, my overarching sense was that you've got this conference in which, well, as you're, I'm sure, going to point out, there were some oddities in the material presented at the conference, and there was a context for every event of the conference, which was wearing masks, which are not known to be a especially useful mechanism to prevent the transmission of COVID. And what does it mean to be at a conference of biologists in which some fraction of the material is actually smoke and mirrors, and a biologist should easily see that?
Right. Absolutely. So here's just, I stopped going to conferences before I should have, because I found them infuriating and mediocrity. But I always loved this part of it, and thinking about, just as I always loved a course catalog, like thinking about, okay, which of these sessions am I going to go to? And so I haven't looked through all of it yet. It's out. And online you can find the abstracts. If this had the abstracts, 10 times as thick, more than that. But just from the titles, I see a lot to be excited at this conference, which is still going on right now. They're having like their end of thing ball.
It's a long conference.
The 2nd through the 7th, 3rd through the 7th. So it started when you halfway through you being in Austin. they've got sessions on evolution of behavior, sexual selection, communication, locomotion, an entire session called Heads or Tails, Control Surfaces in Aquatic Locomotion. Cool. Just 3 pages, I've got these 3 talks. Rules for emergent synchrony during bioluminescent behavior of sea fireflies. So, how is it? Rules for emergent synchrony during bioluminescent behavior of sea fireflies. I never heard of a sea firefly before.
Yeah.
But how do these presumably marine insects end up syncing up what they are doing?
Now, wait a second. So, fireflies.
Sea fireflies.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But fireflies proper.
All I've got is the title, incidentally, so we can talk about this, but I got nothing more than that.
We're going to speculate, and if the sea fireflies are offended, that's going to be, they can write a sternly worded letter.
Okay.
But in actual fireflies...
All I've got is the authors. That doesn't help.
No.
Yeah.
In actual fireflies, you've got 2 kinds of synchrony. You could potentially have synchrony of emergence, which is kind of implied by that title.
Yes.
And
yes.
you could have synchrony of luminescing, right? So there are some fireflies on Earth in which a tree will luminesce in sync. We don't know which that is.
We don't know which it is, no. And that in a way, that actually makes for a really cool talk, because you're like, oh, I want to know. Or if you were actually deciding between, this and one of the 10 other concurrent sessions, you would probably go online, look at the abstract, and see if they were actually doing anything interesting before going and spending whatever it was. I didn't even look, 10 or 12 minutes at the talk. Another title that I thought I would have been interested to go to if I had been at this conference: Alligators use elastic energy storage in ankle extensions during steady state walking.
Alligators, ankle extensions.
Ankle extension walking. So this put me in mind of Archosaur ankles, which you can just very quickly, Zach, put this on screen and then take it down, because I'm not going to walk through it. But this is a slide for my Archosaur evolution lecture back when I gave Archosaur evolution lectures, Archosaurs being birds, dinosaurs, and crocodilians. And Archosaur ankles are variable. And think about a bird and think about how they walk along on their legs, and they don't. They just kind of pad along. I can't really do it because I got cats.
Beans PhD said, "Are you?"
Whereas, if you've ever watched video of or been lucky enough to be around a crocodilian, crocodile, alligator,
Beans PhD said, "Are you talking about Iron Banner?"
Usually, they kind of sit in this position, right? And they even will move a little bit in the slow position. But if you excite them, or anger them, or scare them, they will move their legs under them, and they do a high walk that can be very, very fast. And that is because they've got this thing called a crurotarsal ankle, in which they can basically have their bones in this orientation or in this orientation, and it's stable both ways. Whereas the other archosaurs, the birds and the dinosaurs, were stuck in a sort of flat-footed position.
So if they were to be attacked by hymenopterans of some kind, they could scurry away rapidly. And if I studied that, and I was going to deliver a talk, it could be Archosaurus ants and ankles.
Okay.
All right.
I'm not sure
Ants
it's worth
and
it.
ankles. It wasn't worth it?
Ants and ankles.
See, ants and ankles, as opposed to aunts and uncles. Never mind. I just thought I'd try it.
You know
Yes.
that when you do that sort of thing, it makes the person who you're doing it to think, he can't have been listening to what I was saying.
No, I
coming up with
was.
that."
No. On the contrary. I was listening.
You had to be listening to some of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I noted your beautiful diagram and was impressed that you happened to have a slide on this exact topic.
Well, so elastic energy storage and ankle extensions, I assume that talk on alligators at this conference, still going on right now, was actually about soft tissue. Elastic energy storage, right? That sounds like soft tissue rather than bone, but it's related.
Well, elastic energy storage is going to be like the bounce that comes from not contracting a muscle, but
right. But that's soft. That's the soft tissue stuff. So it's going to be ligaments, tendons, muscles, ligaments and tendons. And then just one more title: War and Sex in the Tropics: Performance Trade-offs in the World's Largest Semmelparous Mammals. So I'm sharing this, and I'll read that again for you to parse it. I'm sharing these in part because these academic conferences may seem from the outside like they couldn't have any value at all. They're really boring and everything. But people are having fun with the titles. They're having fun with the abstracts. They're having fun with the science. Like, if the science isn't enjoyable to do some other kind of science, or don't do science at all, right? So, war and sex in the tropics, performance trade-offs in the world's largest semiparous mammals. I don't know that I actually did in this case go to the abstract, because I was like, what do they think the world's largest semiparous mammals are? Semiparous just refers to an organism that has sex, has one mating event. Maybe it may be a short period of events, but then dies. So, for instance, Pacific salmon famously spend all this non-reproductive time out at sea, and then they return, that's the anadromy part, back to their natal stream, and they have a series of mating events, and then they die. They do not go back out to sea and come back and have another.
So this is going to have to be a rodent?
No, it's a marsupial. It's the quoll. Quoll, the quoll. But even their abstract. So what we're talking about now is, what is the world's largest semiparous mammal? That is a mammal that by its very being has sex once, or has a brief mating season and then dies and doesn't have another mating season afterwards. But I take slight issue because, as it turns out, the males are almost always semiparous, but the females actually have a couple of mating seasons.
Now that you mention it,
so
I
it's
do recall
one
that.
sex semiparity, and the other sex not so much. But anyway, it made for a good title.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's probably both the world's largest and smallest, arguably, semiparous mammal.
Well, yes, unless there's another right there within that clade of marsupials, I think, because there aren't any placental mammals, which is like all the mammals you can think of that aren't. What's the one in the New World?
What?
The marsupial? I can't think of.
Didelphus.
Yeah, possums.
Possums, yeah.
Basically, if it's not a possum or it lives in Australia, it's probably a placental, unless it's an echidna or a platypus. Okay.
We're now driving people
Driving
off
people
by
away,
the
yeah.
minute. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'll skip that. I'm going to skip that. Integrative biology incubator. How do plants, animals, fungi, and algae solve the same problems differently? It's a brainstorming workshop that they had. And what they say in the description of the brainstorming workshop, what blind spots become apparent in our core biological concepts when we compare and contrast solutions from different biological kingdoms? Awesome. Yes. That's the sort of thing that should be happening at scientific conferences. Pull people together from all over the world, mostly the US, but all over the world, and put those who want to be there in a room together and say, okay, you have expertise in frogs, and you have expertise in tomatoes, and you have expertise in morels, and, how do they all solve the problem of getting, of growing, of getting nutrients, of, whatever it is, of cell recovery, whatever it is. When are these solutions shared, and between which clades, and when are they different, and what can we learn? Like, that's awesome. That's part of what drove me to be interested in biology.
If
right?
well done, awesome.
If well done, awesome. However, there were 9 symposia at the conference. Symposia basically being conferences within a conference. So a symposia has sort of a higher level of prestige than just the sessions. It's been organized carefully, and you probably had to sort of submit something. It was a higher standard to be admitted in, both to be a symposium and then to be able to talk at the symposium. And several of the symposia looked really fascinating. One of them was Biology at Birth, the Role of Infancy in Providing the Foundation for Lifetime Success. And a number of really interesting talks. But there's also the Sexual Diversity and Variation Symposium, which I suspect it was those people who were handing out these guys, these pride masks. It did include some talks that appear to be actual science, but it's mostly a smorgasbord of self-indulgent confusion, and was co-organized by a graduate student who will no doubt go far, given that he's playing by all the current ideological rules and fashions. But his Twitter profile, and I'm not going to share details or specifics of exactly who he is or what his institution is, so I've taken out the identifying features here. Twitter profile reads, without the identifying features, queer trans evolutionary biologist, aspiring plant, #SciComm, #SciComm, drag king, relentlessly earnest, they, them. This is one of the co-organizers of one of the symposia at one of the biggest biology conferences going on at all, and it happens to be going on right now. Some of the talk titles organized by this they, them, queer, trans, evolutionary biologist, aspiring plant person are Linnaean Libertines, the queer possibilities of plants, and this one appears to be from the lab of someone who should know better. The talk is Fluidity and Inconstancy, Australian bush tomatoes, Solanum, as an exemplar of non-normative sex expression in plants and across life.
Non-normative sex expression.
In plants.
Normative.
Normative. In tomatoes.
Well, if you're going to have something non-normative in
Australian
plants.
bush tomatoes.
Right, sure.
You know, pretty non-normative.
Yeah. As far as plants go in the direction of non-normativity, I would imagine that tomatoes, and especially the Australian bush variety, would be at the top of the list.
It was the low-hanging fruit.
Ooh, that was pretty well done, actually. Yeah, the low-hanging fruit. But all right, so this does
seriously, people. I mean, come on.
This does get to the central question, though.
Yeah.
My claim is, if you have, I don't know how many people were at this conference. It was hundreds.
It's a big conference.
It's a big
Yeah.
conference. If you have all of these people actively involved in academic biology, studiously not making eye contact with the fact that there are symposia that make no sense going on at the conference where they are, abiding by mandates that make little sense at the conference where they are,
Yes.
the field doesn't exist, because the idea is, the whole point of science is that you're supposed to follow the evidence using the hypothetico-deductive method of science to figure out what is actually true, and that is the North Star. To the extent that a field is going to kowtow to fiction, right, then it's not a scientific field. And it doesn't matter that it may occasionally do something scientific, because the point is it has signed up for a value system in which something else apparently has priority. And, I don't know anything about this person who organized the symposium, but you can certainly imagine, knowing what we saw in academia, as you say, a person's likely to go far. Why? Because nobody's going to be in a position to say, actually, that work wasn't good enough. That work didn't mean anything. What's more, it wasn't scientific, right? Because if you did say that to somebody who claimed to be trans, then the point is, oh, well, you're discriminating against me because I'm trans. Check and mate.
Check and mate, and also, he's doing it very effectively now, because just like publish or perish used to be the rule of law in academia, and it's sort of expanded to, well, also you're expected to do outreach, and you're supposed to have all of these different kinds of experiences wherein you engage with the broader community, and so it's not just publishing peer-reviewed academic papers, on which we have talked a lot about the problems there, but that had been sort of the gold standard. This person has now organized a symposium at one of the largest biological conferences, and previously gave an invited talk at another conference. And those two things on a CV, applying out of grad school for a postdoc, that's huge. Most people don't have that. Most grad students don't have that. So, and yet the topics of both the talk, which I'm not going to spend time on here, and this symposium at this conference are not scientific. There's no science there, as far as I can tell. And, no, I wasn't there, and they don't have the talks up yet. They are going to post the talks, and I was going to watch them, but they're not up yet. But it gives the appearance. It's like it's Potemkin science. It's Potemkin academia. It's this facade, and all you have to, the line on the CV is what potential employers, academic employers will be looking for. Like, oh, well, look at you. Aren't you a go-getter? Haven't you done a lot of good work? Like, well, I did do work. Doesn't look like it was good.
No, but it's even worse than that.
I'm sure of it.
Here's how it's worse. Imagine that your core desire in life was trans activism.
Yeah.
You know it's a real pain in the ass if you're a trans activist? evolutionary biology, right? So if your core thing was to shut those evolutionary biologists up, right? People who understand that reef fish aren't the invalidation of binary sex, right? You might go get yourself one of them fancy PhDs in evolutionary biology, and you might wield it like a weapon. So I'm expecting that we're going to see this emerge as, and you can imagine, unless the world gets over the idea that as soon as you're trans, you're right. As soon as we get over that idea, we can skip this. But until then, what this means is that as this person is able to set up symposia and give invited talks in order that people can, satisfy their kowtowing obligations or whatever, right? This person is going to gain power, and that power is going to be used for what I call idea laundering, right? He is going to launder wrong ideas into evolutionary biology, which is going to make it harder and harder to do high-quality evolutionary biology because, are you going to cite it? Are you going to ignore it? What do you do, right? And I will point out, I think it's Michel Foucault who essentially argued to Trojan horse fields, to enter them and disrupt their ability to do what they do. Maybe it was Marcuse, but I think it was Foucault. But in any case, it's somebody's idea that the purpose of this stuff is actually its activism and disruption. And so, wake up, evolutionary biologists. There's one headed your way.
Yeah.
Right? And,
it's already inside the house.
Right. The call is now coming from inside the house. And I will just say, this is not to say that trans people shouldn't be able to do evolutionary biology, but if your purpose is to disrupt evolutionary biology with nonsense stuff, right? I mean, the fact is, if you land in evolutionary biology as a trans person, what are the chances that you also land on that as your topic, right? In other words, why are you not studying chelation in the scales of a fence lizards or something, right? Why are you studying that exact thing? And does that not suggest that maybe you've landed there because evolutionary biology is not your top priority, but something else is?
Exactly. So I've told this story before, but the line in the bio of the person who co-organized the symposium, queer/trans evolutionary biologist. Whenever I see something modifying evolutionary biologist that isn't like a narrowing of what kind of evolutionary biologist you are.
Yep.
Right? I think to...
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. You know the story I'm going to tell. I think to when I was trying to sell my first book, Antipode, and it was about my research and life in Madagascar. And I had a good agent, and he was pitching it, and this was long before we ever lived in Portland or anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. But actually, there was a small press in Portland that showed the first interest, and I ended up getting it published by a major publishing house. But this small press showed interest, and they were offering, a nice amount of money for a grad student. We hardly made any money at all at that point. And they were super interested because they said, it's a story of feminist science. And I said, nope, can't go there, won't go there because that's not a thing. And they're like, well, what do you mean? It feels, okay. So, and there's no mention of feminism in the book. But I said, well, as a woman who goes alone these places, you must be a feminist. And at that point, this would have been late 90s, early aughts. It's like, I actually do. I did still think of myself as a feminist at that point, but that's separate from being a scientist. And you can't modify scientist with feminist, because the feminism is an ideological position, and if that is informing, if that is modifying linguistically scientist, then your science is suspect and your science is flawed, and you aren't holding the scientific process as the thing that is most important. Because if you're doing science and you ask a question that comes up with an answer, that you come up with an answer that you don't like, you're not expecting, you wish weren't true, it's still the answer. And if you are informing your science with some ideology, which is likely to have you push some answers and deep six others, then you're not really doing science. So same thing, queer, trans, evolutionary biologist. Like, you can be, we've talked, like, no one can define queer, so let's just put queer.
No. Two things. One, it's not the story I thought you were going to tell, but the fact that queer shows up without a meaning in this case, right, is in and of itself an indication that something is up here, right? How is it not redundant with trans?
Yeah. But
Right?
I mean, like, you could, as you already said, like, you can be trans and you can be an evolutionary biologist, but putting them together validates the scientist part.
Totally agree, but the fact of putting queer and trans together as a co-modifier, right, that sounds like it's rather full of meaning. What exactly is that meaning?
Yeah.
Right? So I once, long ago, tweeted something like, if the Q were removed from LGBTQ, who exactly would be excluded? And got not a single useful answer.
Right.
So saying, well, then what is this community, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's no community, but I'm saying, why is there an extra letter in there, if not as some kind of mechanism to do something other than convey meaning, if there's no meaning? But the story I thought you were going to tell was, when we were at Evergreen, there was a hire that was advanced for a feminist economist. And you and I both raised this exact issue, saying, an economist...
Saying no.
An economist is supposed to describe how economics works. And the idea that you've put an ideological modifier on it means that's not what you're doing. Right? You've effectively advertised a filter, so it's the same meaning as...
No, and when I argued against that position, because I think both you and I were on sort of the general hiring committee to decide at that point, so we both supposedly had some voice there, but didn't make a difference. I believe I told the story that I just told here then too, because it can't work that way, and everyone is buying the press of the people who are claiming to be the most damaged and hurt by societal structures, and we just have to stop. We have to stop.
I'm an environmental mathematician. I don't know.
Doesn't mean anything.
No.
Okay. One last thing. We just lost half of our light.
All right. No, we got mood lighting. It's for the one last thing. Let's just... Let's play it as a feature.
That's a lot more than that.
It's play it as a feature.
Well, I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah.
That's not a feature.
Okay. So I went looking this week for reasons that may become clear in Natural Selections on my Substack for some of my old music books. And in looking for some of my old music books, I found this. Our Natural Science World. A project of the Actually, Zach, I need you back here to show my screen.
Fairfax, can you do it?
Hey, Zach. Like, I actually can't do this without the screen. I'm not sure what to do. Zach?
Here, talk about it. He'll come back.
Okay. The lighting is much less important than actually being able to show the screen here. Zach, I need you to show my screen. Okay, so I found this, and it turns out to be a piece of work that I did in 4th grade when I was. This was right around when kids in LA in the public schools were being bused, and so I was being bused for half a year, and I was at Baldwin Hills, and this is at the end of the year, science lab, and I do this bit on, it's a 16-page document, in fact.
That does sound like you.
Here's the table of contents.
Wow, color-coded and everything.
Oh my God, it's like I got scientific instruments, 3 natural science kingdoms, what? Which apparently are mineralogy, plants, and animals. man.
It's like 20 questions.
Oh man, and I mean, there's some really good stuff in here. I gotta say, and I'm only gonna show you 5 pages. I've already showed you two. So we got mineralogy, what makes soil, plant propagation, invertebrates, vertebrates, fish class, amphibian class, reptilia class, aves class, and
Talk about it. He'll come back.
okay. The lighting is much less important than actually being able to show the screen here. Zach, I need you to show my screen. Okay, so I found this, and it turns out to be a piece of work that I did in 4th grade when I was. This was right around when kids in LA in the public schools were being bused, and so I was being bused for half a year, and I was at Baldwin Hills, and this is at the end of the year science lab, and I do this bit on it's a 16-page document, in fact.
That does sound like you.
Here's the table of contents.
Wow, color-coded and everything.
Oh my God, so I got scientific instruments, 3 natural science kingdoms, what? Which apparently are mineralogy, plants, and animals.
It's like 20 questions.
Oh man, and I mean, there's some really good stuff in here. I gotta say, and I'm only gonna show you 5 pages. I've already showed you two. So we got mineralogy, what makes soil, plant propagation, invertebrates, vertebrates, fish class, amphibian class, reptilia class, aves class, and class Mammalia. So, very typical for the era and for elementary school, even in a advanced 4th grade science class. We have, for instance, cricket observation. I mean, look at this. It's pretty well done here. You've got I did the drawing of the various parts of the cricket, and I even give the temperature formula at the bottom for how to tell what temperature it is by how many chirps they've got going per minute. I got some good stuff here. But then we get to vertebrates. I don't even know what the amoeba-looking thing is supposed to be. My best guess is the cross-section of a vertebra, but it doesn't really work. But whatever, I'm not really totally sure what's going on there. And I've got the 5 groups of vertebrates. Again, this is not actually how evolution worked, but I got a really unhappy-looking frog, but it's the only one I did in color. And aves is represented by, it looks like a cat got to it.
Yes.
Frankly, it's just 2 feathers. Reptilia, represented by the snake, as I was already into snakes, so I'm doing snakes. And then the mammally, as I describe it there, is, I think that's just fur. I think that's it's just some
A clump of fur.
It's like the birds and the mammals both got just like their representative
Could have done a
things.
glass of milk.
Yeah, but large size, long lives mostly. Not many started 420 million years ago. I got some good stuff in here. But I was just flipping through this. I was all alone. You were in Austin. I'm like, I don't remember anything about this. I don't remember anything about even making this book at all. It was a big project. And then I get to the birds.
Boris said Mantis hates
Aves,
defending an objective.
Backbones, feathers, endothermic, beaks or bills, good brain, eyesight, keen hearing, Audubon. I don't know what that means. Audubon, okay? Like he studied birds, sure.
Yes.
And then finally, and there's a lot more good stuff here, but I have the classifications of the birds. Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so we got 4 types of birds.
Boris said crazy to think this
4
man
types
does
of birds.
CONF
Water
fluxes on
birds?
trios.
Predatory birds, unusual birds, and pet birds.
Boris said emoji wars. KK.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And I have to say that despite such ridiculousness, I got an excellent work.
Of course you did.
Excellent work.
Of course you did.
Even as unusual birds and pet birds were 2 of my 4 categories of birds.
There are some unusual birds and there are some pet birds.
There are.
No, I feel strangely teleported back to Was that fourth grade?
Fourth grade, yeah.
To
it was
my
grade.
fourth grade self, and I feel unable to compete with that overachieving girl who doesn't know when to quit with her 4 types of birds and
Oh my God, no, it's. I mean, there's more. I'm gonna stop.
Yeah.
At the point that I got to pet birds is one of the categories of birds.
Yeah, don't show that to Arnold.
My graduate advisor, he would not approve. So anyway, that's it. I was trying to not lose the plot.
Yes.
Back in fourth grade, trying to figure out the plot. I mean, I mentioned chondrichthyes in there. Hey, look at that. And so we were lit, and thus there was light.
And thus there was, again, light
Yes.
for who knows how long.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, I think we've arrived there.
Okay.
There are no doubt questions.
There will be, I think. There will be questions.
And we will endeavor to answer them.
Indeed. And so you can ask questions at darkhorsesubmissions.com. There will certainly be already some questions there, but you can continue to ask questions. And again, we encourage you to join our Patreons, where you can have access to our thriving Discord community. And Brett is having a conversation on his Patreon tomorrow. Evolutionary conversation at 9 a.m. Pacific. Come find me at Natural Selections on Substack, read our book, and until we see you next time, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
And if you see the plot, please let us know where it's gone so we can alert some folks.
Codfish replied to Bora ZZZZZZZ.
In the vaxxed. Could lack of selective pressure drive COVID-19 to stop mutating? So the second part of that first comment seems like the wrong conclusion to me, which may cause immune system to ignore COVID-19 in the vaxxed.
Well, I mean, I agree that that's part of the implication of what may happen. If it's telling me, I mean, let's take an example, and it's not a perfect example because it's IgE mediated, but if you take let's say pollen, and you react to pollen, and you are induced to not react, maybe that's mediated through IgG4, then...
The induced to not react is an IgG4 effect.
Potentially,
okay.
Yeah. What I'm saying is I don't know, maybe
okay.
nobody knows, the interaction between the IgE system, which is the one that seems to mediate allergy, and the IgG4 system, which seems to tamp down the inflammatory response.
Okay.
Now, those two things may be identical, and they may match what I said about immunologists using the antigen in question to induce a standing down of the inflammatory effect. But basic point is, if you have the IgG4 anti-inflammatory effect, basically the anti-immunity signal, then that could cause the immune system to stop reacting to COVID, which likely is a very bad thing, right? It's the inverse of what a vaccine is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. There may be instances in which you are better off not fighting, right? So don't know what the connection is, but there are certain viruses that we carry once we've been infected that hide in tissues, and reacting to them may be a bad thing. And basically, once they've invaded, let's say, neurological tissue and they've hid there, it may be best to leave them alone. That may be less damage. Now, in the case of COVID, the mechanism of action, and as far as we know, it doesn't seem to hide in places like immunological tissue. In all likelihood, tamping down the immune response to the pathogen is inherently bad. If we tamp down with these so-called vaccines the immune response to a particular spike motif, it may be that a different immunity arises, that the vaccinated will react as naive, that they will then have infections that will precipitate a new immune response to some other motif, to the nucleocapsid, for example.
motif is a term of art here, or you're just using that?
It's a term of art.
Okay. So motif being some recognizable piece of the virus.
Right. Now, I will point out something I didn't mention in the main discussion. That's probably we should have discussed. Is there is now a distinction in light of this IgG4 result. There is now apparently a distinction between those of us who haven't been inoculated at all with the mRNA stuff, which presumably also includes people who got the DNA version, the adenovectored version, and those who got the mRNA version exclusively, right? So I don't know how that plays out, but the idea that there will be two populations, one of which has, those of us who weren't vaccinated at all against COVID, presumably have a much broader response. The natural immunity is not only stronger, but broader. It's to multiple motifs. And then we will have a population in which...
Or it has the capacity to be broader, right? I mean, you could expose to what for you is a novel pathogen, whatever motif, it's not a term I'd heard before in this context, whatever motif is first recognized by our immune system will be the motif that your immune system mounts a response to first and most strongly. And so your immune system will not necessarily mount a response to all of the things. It's just, it is more haphazard with regard to, it could be... I don't remember the example you just gave. If it's not the spike protein, it's something else. Nuclear capsid, okay. And, given that most of the vaccines seem to be spike protein specific, that gives the potential for a person with natural immunity to have developed immunity that will remain robust even if the spike protein evolves into something otherwise unrecognizable.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, in a natural infection, there are all kinds of mechanisms to cause a diversity in the immune response. So, for example, you have antigen-presenting cells that will take various different antigens and show them to the immune system so that there's sort of a built-in tendency not to hone in on a single motif. The question here is, if IgG4 is a signal to stand down, then a virus that displays the correct electromagnetic signature to trigger that elevated IgG4 response is sending out it's like a transponder on a friendly vehicle that will keep you from targeting it, right? If the tank is putting out a signature that you can recognize, that's one of ours, don't shoot at it. So if first SARS-CoV-2 is broadcasting a signal that our immune system has taken to be a sign not to shoot, that will give SARS-CoV-2 added leeway in people who have that IgG4 triggering. It could extend to the other motifs. In other words, if the virus is putting out a signal that tells the immune system to stand down, then does that basically cloak the other motifs from a reaction? Don't know. There does seem to be the potential here for two different populations, and I would say...
Human populations.
Yeah. Those of us who did not get the vaccines, many of us have had COVID, will have natural immunity from that interaction and will not have elevated IgG4.
Yep.
And then there will be those, so in other words, you could see a lot of things happening. The population of people who are now showing elevated levels of IgG4 may allow pathogens to circulate that would otherwise shut themselves down, that would have an R naught below 1, which would mean that they tend towards extinction.
Yep.
But it may circulate, and that may give the opportunity for something to evolve the ability to get to the unvaccinated or the less vaccinated, or the DNA vaccinated, who are apparently not having elevated IgG4. Yeah. So, again, it's a classic welcome to complex systems. You know, we don't know how this plays out, but the fact that
Barry _McCockiner said was watching Frostbolt 6 Warlocks all with stasis turrets just bomb the zones.
That will have two different responses to not only SARS-CoV-2, but whatever other virus can figure out a motif to trigger that shutdown.
Right. But the second part of the question, could lack of selective pressure drive COVID-19 to stop mutating, SARS-CoV-2 to stop mutating? There's no lack of selective pressure. There may be a diminishment in some domains, in the motif of the spike protein in those who are most mRNA vaccinated.
Well, it depends. My guess would be the stand-down signal that is mediated through IgG4 could result in increased viral proliferation in those who have that effect, and therefore decreased selective pressure. I could see that.
Oh, because there's just more of it, so those people. But that hinges on there's an assumption in there, which is that such people would be more infectious. Because just producing more that doesn't have many mutations or any within the individual doesn't have any evolutionary effect unless it then goes out into the world and
right.
transmits.
So you could have a difference in the sickness within an individual that doesn't result in it passing on. But my guess is what you've got is, the more virus that's infecting greater numbers of cells effectively constitutes a larger laboratory in which this gain-of-function experiment exists. So anyway, I think it's frightening no matter what category you're in.
Yeah. Excuse me.
But something else I want to say. I did want to say one other thing about this question of inflammatory and anti-inflammatory responses.
Oh, yeah. Can I actually read? So I had this question for you, and we didn't get to it in the top of the hour. Let me just read from the abstract.
Sure.
Right? This is, again, if you want to show my screen, you can, Zach. This is the paper we talked about in the main episode today, Livestream 155, by Ergang et al., class switch towards non-inflammatory spike-specific IgG4 antibodies after repeated SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccination. It's the title of the paper. Second sentence of the abstract reads, shortly after the initial 2 mRNA vaccine doses, the IgG response mainly consists of the pro-inflammatory subclasses IgG1 and IgG3. Here we report that several months after the second vaccination, SARS-CoV-2 specific antibodies were increasingly composed of non-inflammatory IgG4, which were further boosted by a third mRNA vaccination and/or SARS-CoV-2 variant breakthrough infections. So my question reading that was, why is inflammatory, IgG1 and IgG3 being inflammatory, pro-inflammatory, versus IgG4, which is now taking a much larger chunk than it had previously of your total IgG complement after all these mRNA vaccinations, which is non-inflammatory? Why does that matter? What's the relevance?
So it is often confusing. There's certain things like inflammation, which we as patients of medicine consider negative, right? Inflammation is bad. Well, inflammation is bad in a sense, but inflammation is also adaptive, right? So what we're looking at is a system in which inflammation is a mechanism of action for a response to, in this case, a pathogen, right? So, for example, you might get, if you have an infected tissue, that tissue might swell, right? And it will swell and produce pus. What is pus? Pus is white blood cells, right? And so when you've got pus in an infected something, what you've got are white blood cells and antibodies that have gummed up the something. Maybe it's a bacterium. And, is it good to have pus? Well, pus is the product of an active immune response. And so, anyway, there are various cascades that involve inflammation to actually recruit immune cells into a location where they need to do their action. And so medicine often treats things like inflammation, and the answer sometimes is likely to be counterproductive.
Right. Treating all sorts of symptoms that, I'm uncomfortable, doctor. Well, let me see what I can do to make you comfortable. How about we get rid of the reason that I'm uncomfortable as opposed to getting rid of the discomfort? Treating fevers is the same thing. Very often, not always, but very often.
Exactly. And so, people will also be familiar. Antihistamines are considered good because they shut down an allergic response. But the point is the allergic response is the inappropriate action of the immune system, and the histamine response is part of a correct immune response to an infection, right? So there's a histamine cascade, and antihistamine works, assuming that what you've got is an allergic response that you do want to shut down, an out-of-place allergic response rather than a correctly placed immunological response to a pathogen.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's that. Inflammation is part of a proper response. It certainly goes wrong, but medicine often overinterprets it because it's present where there is pathology, but often in response to it.
Good. All right, before we get to the next question, can I get you, Zach, to just put something over the light that's coming off the computer, the flashy stroby thing that is now, with our new setup, in my line of sight? Because I don't want to have like a seizure on camera. I don't have seizures, but yeah, I don't want to.
Right.
Yeah.
I think not wanting to is perfectly valid.
Totally. I forgot what to do. I forgot to do this. There we go. That's the one we just read, right? Yeah. Okay. Is there an evolutionary take on why humans tend to rediscover the past? Rediscovery of classical antiquity, rediscovery of authentic Baroque musical practices in the past several decades, recycling of fashion trends. And it's written by someone whose screen name is Daniel Kurganoff, violinist.
I'm happy to riff on this. I think it's probably not a single thing.
Yeah.
But the way evolution works, forget humans, forget rediscovery of the past, but the way evolution works is something will generate a new set of opportunities, right? We talked last time about, for example, the amnion, the membrane that allows eggs to be freed from a liquid environment. 1 of 4, okay. It's a membrane that allows eggs to be freed from a liquid environment. That opens up a whole range of possibilities for creatures to exploit niches that are not right next to water, right? So that causes what we call an adaptive radiation, right? That is a radiation of a bunch of different forms that try different stuff. And over time, what happens is that radiation of branches gets pruned at stuff that worked sort of, but wasn't stable long term, right? And it may be that a bunch of little branches go extinct, and some of the branches that did really well then pick up the niche space that represented the branches that have gone extinct, something like that. But what you see is a large number of experiments that then gets narrowed down over time. So one thing you might imagine in human art space, for example, is that somebody figures out, an instrument that allows you to explore some part of musical space that wasn't accessible with whatever you had before, right? And that results in a whole lot of experimentation. Some of it is interesting momentarily but doesn't go anywhere, and some of it's really good and opens up whole new genres. And so you might imagine that there would be a kind of return to the well phenomenon, right? That basically, you have some set of standards, and then you have experimentation. The experimentation is the fun place to be until it's not anymore, and then returning to the well and figuring out where the next radiation goes is better than trying to create the next radiation from the tip of a branch or something like that. So there's that. I think there's also in human space and this is sort of, it's classic in terms of what we were talking about with respect to conservatism and progressivism earlier today, which is progressivism is where the dynamism comes from, but it's dangerous, right? Progressivism goes wrong a lot, right? You can't say, well, then screw progressivism, because then you don't get anywhere. You have to have the progressivism, but the point is the idea that the progressives go crazy might be kind of an evergreen, right?
Right, the tension between the two, and the constant battle from both sides to get more of what they think is right, which is to say change in one hand and not change in the other. That is necessary, because you take one of those away and suddenly you're just stuck, or you're moving fast, and without any countervailing force, you're not going to be in good shape after very long.
Right.
Because stuck in a totally static world, if it had been working, might be okay if everyone agreed that it was awesome, but that's welcome to complex systems times 1,000 here, right?
Yep.
So There is no ability to say, well, what we had was perfect and it remains perfect and nothing has changed and therefore that's what we have to maintain. That's across all systems, but of course there will be domains at which that may be true. Like, actually, and all of the proposed changes are too dangerous, too unknown, too fraught, so we're going to stick with what you got for now until we know more about possible changes, at least.
And there is also the added problem that when things go wrong, you may not know where the wrong turn was. You may be able to detect. I mean, we are in this circumstance, right? Every institution has failed. People are believing absolute gobbledygook. But the question is, all right, if you wanted to reboot from a prior state, what's the last state that worked?
Yeah.
We're not going to agree on that, right?
Yep.
And so I think we are seeing a strange, but maybe not so strange, resurgence of a conservatism deeper than most of us would have expected to return, right? We're seeing a resurgence of religious belief that is more fundamentalist than you might expect in a very modern age like this one. And in some sense, I think the message is, yeah, but you guys screwed up, right? The last thing that worked, was closer to those old stories.
Yep.
So anyway, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I think there's a danger in that too, because I don't actually...
Of course there is.
You can't... Not only is it... it is unlikely to work, right? Returning to the world of Yahweh and Jesus doesn't answer the questions of today. So it's even the fact, even if it is the last place that things worked, it's not relevant to most of the stuff that we actually now need to manage.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue, said I, is about as far from being a biblical scholar as you can get. I read it, right? You could argue that you need those as, you need some of the teachings therein, at least in the New Testament, in order to be foundational, things about which we can agree, but that is only a start, and that it is nowhere near, I could see an argument for, and I'm not sure I'm making this argument myself, but I could see an argument for that being necessary but not sufficient to move forward with care in the world in trying to form a society that is maximally able to generate well-being for the maximum number of people as possible.
Yeah. I think we're in trouble because I think the instinct to reboot from something fundamental is kicking in, and I think...
Well, I didn't make an argument for reboot. That wasn't anything that I said.
I know, but you said necessary but not sufficient. And my point would be even...
I also said that wasn't my argument, that I might believe that, but that I could see that argument being made.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is, as we argue in our book, we can't go back. We have to go forward, and there's no safe way to do it. And I think that's just where we're stuck. It's really...
Right, but I'm not sure what you're disagreeing with in what I said. That this is a point that I feel like you've made, that there is much in, specifically the teachings in the New Testament, that hold value in today's world, and it is turning away from them that has in part led to some of the decay of other functional systems.
Right. So I guess what I'm arguing now, and I don't mean to be disagreeing with anything that you're saying. I don't think I do, but you have two things have gone wrong.
Only two.
Two fundamental things have gone wrong. One, we've lost our minds in some kind of a progressive way, right? Where there's no discipline in progressivism anymore, and
change is good. All change is good.
More change. Everything that we have is bad. Tear it down. Something better will happen. All that nonsense. The instinct when that happens is a reboot. But in the period since the last reboot, everything fundamental has changed, right?
When are you calling the last reboot?
I don't know. I don't think it matters. I think the point is the rate of change is so fast that whatever the last place where there was an outbreak of conservatism that restored some kind of mental discipline that allowed us to move forward again, the last time that happened was a whole different world. And so I don't see an answer.
I don't yet hear you said that we got two problems. So you say, progressivism.
Yeah.
So the issue on the conservative side, the side on the right, whatever we should be calling it. The issue is what is that in a nutshell? If the problem over here in terms of like how progressivism is going off the rails is if change is often good, the illogic goes, then all change must be good and we must embrace all change or else you're a fascist, right?
Well,
so that's easy to describe when we've done it. So what's the version on the
like
right?
this. Imagine that we set off into space in the fit of wide-eyed progressivism. Okay, we're traveling in space, and then at some point, the space progressivists lose the plot, and they start following dark energy to the next great human location. And it turns out not to be true. It doesn't lead us anywhere, and we're starving, and all of that. Okay, and the answer is, well, let's go back to the last place that worked. Good idea, except it blew up. It's not there anymore, so you can't go back to it. And that's what I'm arguing has happened, is that the world in which the conservatives, in which their point applies, doesn't exist.
Okay, but
And they don't know that.
the golden rule
Yeah.
is not it has not blown up.
No, the golden
Right.
rule, and this has been my argument with Jordan Peterson, is there are a few things that are timeless, right? Golden rule, a real good example. The golden rule is one of many versions of that rule. Various different traditions tells us that one's probably pretty robust. But the point is, you can't live on the golden rule. You can't eat it, right? So the idea that there's some group of Amish who remember the old ways and can show us how to do that again. The old ways don't answer how you live at a population in which more than half of us are the product of the Haber-Bosch process.
Right, but I mean you got to exactly what I was going to say. We top of the hour, last hour, whatever hours ago now, we were talking about organic farming practices.
Yep.
And we can afford to, and choose to eat in a way that everyone on the planet can't.
Yep.
Right? So that's not sustainable if we try to apply our values and conclusions for ourselves to everyone, equitably.
Yep.
Right? It won't,
Doesn't scale.
It doesn't scale. So, the Haber-Bosch process, which fixes nitrogen without having to use legumes to do it, basically, and so allows for a lot more food to be grown, which was invented in the early 20th century, facilitated a population boom, which I don't know what else would have done it. Right, like the history didn't run that way, but it's really hard to imagine what other thing could have caused the population to boom quite so extravagantly.
Yep.
As the Haber-Bosch process. But that's not an argument against organic farming. That's not an argument against So the fact that it doesn't work for everyone. If you're going to make that argument then you have to make it to a number of the choices that we're making elsewhere as well,
course.
To be consistent.
But let's take the Amish as an example. Okay, The Amish are a great test case of preserving the old ways. Right, very consciously preserved the old ways and stepped off the escalator of progressivism. If you say, well, the Amish function, and you try to return to it, then 3-4 billion people are going to starve almost immediately. So that can't be a solution. We have to go somewhere that presupposes the Haber-Bosch process and weans us away from its bad consequences. This is one of the problems, I think, for Elon Musk, actually, right? Because Musk is correctly distrustful of the depopulation instinct that so many progressives express. And his point is actually, no, we can have more people and we can do it well. And it's not that he doesn't have a point. I mean, he is the electric car guy, right? He's also pruning cobalt from their process. He is farsighted and visionary.
I didn't know that.
But I think Mars looms too large in his thinking, and the point is,
I mean, if that's not cornucopianism, I don't know what is.
I don't want to call it cornucopianism because he's super mechanistic about all this stuff. It's not like he doesn't know what it means to make Mars habitable.
Right, but mechanistic is reductionist, right? Like, he's you can can up all the stuff that you need to sustain actual life at the most basic level, and that doesn't tell you that quality of life will be anything close to anything that any human being is going to be able to deal with.
As you know,
I know.
I think Mars is a laughable solution to this problem,
right.
and not because he's mechanistically wrong about the possibility. I think he might be wrong about timescale, but I'm willing to even defer to him on that.
It's not the most important question.
It's not the most important question. The most important question, oddly, is at what point does Mars become a better answer than stabilizing the Earth? And the answer is pretty much never in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So, that said, we're now in a pickle. There are too many people to live this way on this planet. There are ways you could alter how we live here, and you could even do it well that would allow more people. But what you can't do is you can't have a system in which the growth in population is built in. Right? You could have a stable high number, you could have a stable low number. What you can't have is the expectation of more and more people all the time. Right? That is self-destabilizing. And I have not heard him speak deeply enough about this to know, presumably he gets that, but what I hear is mostly his correct challenge to those who say depopulate, but I don't hear enough to know what the alternative plan is, and I hear too much of Mars, which strikes me as a kind of, it's a Hail Mary pass at surviving what seems to be coming, but it's not nearly as good as averting the disaster down here on Earth while it's still preservable.
Yep. I'm not sure how we got onto Elon Musk.
He's a space progressive of an interesting kind, I think.
That's not an answer. Okay, next question. Somehow I think we've answered 2 questions, and it's like 40 minutes in. This one is written in slightly concise style, so I'm going to try to interpret it. Gatto, John Taylor Gatto, said, I think this is a representation of Gatto's view on Darwin and Wallace. I will say before I read the question and try to make sense of exactly what it says, that Gatto's take on evolution, at least as he understands it, as it is in schools, is the one place where I have discovered that I completely disagree with him. That I think that Gatto has fallen prey to the thing that so many social scientists, and I don't think Gatto called himself a social scientist, but I've interacted with so many social scientists, anthropologists, sociologists, that sort of thing, who think that Darwin is evil and therefore thinking evolutionarily is evil because of the way that either they learned what it was or the things that have been done in its name. And this is just a simple logical fallacy, but at least insofar, and I haven't read all of Gatto's books, but I've read a fair bit, and I love him overall in terms of educational thinking and theory. But I think he does fall prey. I think he just never, he can't anymore. He's dead now. But he just never had anyone who actually understood what evolution was to just sit down and be like, no, this is actually what it is. So it's possible that this question suggests that he did, because what it says is Gatto, Darwin versus Wallace was political. Schools got biological advance via deadly competition rather than adaptation and cooperation are primary. Do you agree? So I don't get the Darwin versus Wallace here because Darwin and Wallace weren't like competition versus cooperation. Neither of them particularly put one of those before the other. If I understand the question correctly, and I don't remember seeing this in any Gatto that I've read, it sounds like we are being told that Gatto said that the version of evolution that was being taught in schools was competition-driven as opposed to cooperation-driven. I don't agree with the combining cooperation with adaptation there. That doesn't make any sense. Adaptation is equal, cooperation and competition are equally adaptive. So take that out of this picture here for a moment. And I don't understand the Darwin versus Wallace thing either, because...
Yeah, I think it's almost their background as people.
Yeah. Okay, so, but take that out too. I don't know if that's a misunderstanding, if it's just the way the question is worded, a misunderstanding of Gata, like, I don't know where that is. But if we take it to how I think what this means is, and maybe this is a match for what I have seen as an error in Gato's thinking on evolution. He, we are told, argued, evolution was taught as competition for reasons that have nothing to do with reality, and if we'd just gone down a different path, then we would have been studying cooperation just as much. And I'm reminded of this crazy thing that we experienced in grad school, which you know better than I do. Maybe you should report on.
Yeah, this is a recurrent theme amongst good-hearted but wrong-headed biologists.
Well, and other people.
Right. It's contagious because it's a very attractive story.
Yeah.
Right. You know, capitalists who blah 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 evolution blah 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 over focused on competition and haven't realized the glory of cooperation, yada yada yada. And so, what we encountered in the worst case was ecologists, who I would argue is a group of biologists overwhelmingly motivated to go into biology by the desire to do good, which gets in the way of their ability to understand what's going on. Very often, ecology is fascinating, but your ability to leverage what you learn is often minimal. And if they studied it as a basic science rather than a how are we going to fix stuff in science, they'd be better at it. But anyway, we encountered ecologists counting instances in which the evolution textbooks reported on something competitive and compared it to the number of times that cooperation was mentioned, and then because the number was wildly in favor of competition, decided that these books were obviously biased by their capitalist blah 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 blah.
Well, and it's the same freaking error, frankly, as, oh my god, there are more male software engineers than female software engineers, therefore there is bias against female software engineers.
Yes.
Or you shouldn't expect a 1-to-1 ratio, because in the case of software engineers, maybe men are more predisposed to be interested in software engineering, having nothing to do with whether or not they were handed computers as children, although that helps. And maybe, and actually this is 100% true, competition exists in nature a lot, and so does cooperation, but competition probably more frequent, but it's definitely easier to find and measure.
Well, I'll go one step farther. What got me in trouble, when I first heard this business about counting in textbooks, I did just what you did. And I raised my hand, and I remember the craned necks and the dirty looks and all of that. But anyway...
But they were ecologists. You could probably run faster than them.
Yeah, absolutely. Not nice. And actually, many of the ecologists are very dedicated in field work. I'm sure they'd be just fine out there. But anyway, what I said...
We have ecologists among some of our closest friends. Am I allowed to say that?
I think you are. What I said to them as a sort of visitor across the aisle from evolution into ecology, which has always been kind of a fraught border, but anyway, I was interested in ecology because I was interested in the subject matter. What I said to them was, look, competition is inherent to an ecosystem. There is no way you could construct an ecosystem in which competition would not be dominant. You can construct an ecosystem without cooperation. It won't be very interesting. Cooperation will evolve, but the basic point,
it'll be outcompeted by a more cooperative ecosystem. Oh boy.
Right. So here's the punchline to the joke. The punchline is, hey, guess what, ecologists? Why do you think we cooperate? We cooperate. That's why. It is a mode of competition. The point is, it is a more effective mode of competition when it is possible, but it is not a...
As many things are.
Yeah.
More effective when they're possible.
More effective when they're possible, absolutely. But it is not an argument against competition. It is an argument for competing more effectively against whoever it is you're competing against.
Yeah.
And so
because
anyway.
no, we can't all just get along. No, it's not. It's not going to be possible for everyone. Equity for everyone, including everything in the universe. No, that's not how it works.
No, you would have to architect a system to frustrate the competition, because the competition is utterly basic.
And that wouldn't be stable. It wouldn't last.
Right. So think about it this way. If you have a habitat and there's more stuff in it than the creatures in it can use, then the number of creatures goes up until that's not true. That's the first argument. And so what that means is, to the extent that you have a circumstance in which there's no competition, it will evolve to a competitive circumstance. But even worse, imagine if you've got a habitat that's got 1,000 times as much resource as the creatures in it need, and it's heading towards carrying capacity where it will have the amount of resource that that number of creatures needs. There is also a competition to fill it up first, right? Mm-hmm. So the competition is there from the first hour, right? Even if it doesn't look like it. And so anyway, yeah, if this is a representation of Gatto's view, he's got it wrong, as do all of the other people who have made this argument, as do the group selectionists who make similar arguments. And anyway,
anyone else?
I think that's a pretty good list for today.
Pretty good.
For 2022, I think that's about enough.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll stop there. Excellent. I rarely ever got sick before, but since recovering from COVID last year, I've had 3 major bouts of fever, each lasting about a week. Anyone else experience a similar trend? I haven't heard this, but I'm interested if other people have.
So the pattern is...
Rarely got sick before, since recovering from COVID, has been sick 3 times for a week each. Seems to be getting more sick more frequently. And this is, of course, predicted by some of what we're talking about, like in the IgG4 result. Anecdotally, none of us have experienced that, and I haven't heard it, but that's...
Right. But I would say one of the weird signatures of this particular virus is the number of different things it seems to disrupt. It doesn't disrupt them in everybody.
And it will depend on where you where you were sick with it, even though it will manifest, anosmia, right. Loss of smell and taste seems to be pretty common, right? I experienced it. But the first tissue or tissues that it lodged may well predict,
what kind of progressive disease.
What kind of progressive disease and what kind of susceptibility to other disease you have downstream.
Right. I mean, and the basic, there's a deeper message here, which is we tend to think, the model that we are all running on about getting sick, getting a cold, getting better, getting the flu, getting better, is way oversimplified. The fact is, disease does damage, and damage has consequences. Damage basically accelerates the aging of whatever tissues were damaged, and so you are a composite of tissues that are at different meaningful age based on where you've been damaged and by what. And I would say COVID does damage a lot of stuff. It's different what it damages in different people and based on how you got it. But the answer is you're probably not as better as you think, right? You're probably made vulnerable. I mean, just think, for example, about a tissue that has lost cells to your own immune system, killing them because they were infected with COVID. Those wounds are now vulnerabilities for an unrelated pathogen to exploit.
Well, I wonder actually if this might not be one of the things that is meant by long COVID, right? Long COVID is clearly kind of a junk category, right? There's a lot of people, some people are hypochondriacs, some people are really sick with COVID-y symptoms for a long time, and there's everything in between. And to the degree that COVID gets into a tissue that actually will not recover completely, will leave you more susceptible. Even if the person writing this question does not feel sick in between the bouts, that might, if there is greater susceptibility there because of what COVID did, that is at the very least a downstream effect of COVID. And what is downstream effect of COVID if not long COVID?
Yep. I will say that there are good doctors who are treating both long COVID and vaccine injuries. And if you have one of these things, seek them out. They are not hard to find. Follow the podcasts, to the doctors who have been proven right by their courageous stand and reach out to them. They've figured out how to treat these things. And anyway, I know a number of examples of people who have greatly benefited after waiting a long time, finally seek out treatment, and are glad they did.
Yep. Okay, let's, we're closing in on an hour, actually, I think, but we've only answered a few questions, so let's try to get, some of these are just comments, really.
Okay.
We will try to get through them quickly. Dr. Drew is interviewing COVID dissenters, also says he's known Fauci for decades, but may have been name-dropping, seems able to think evolutionarily, maybe worth an interview.
All right.
What is your stance on pet, dog and cat vaccinations, especially if you're living in a country with limited exposure to other domestic animals? One thing I'll say for sure is, and this is, I've talked about this before, that it was actually, we were well into COVID, and I took our black cat Tesla was having some issues, and I took him to a holistic vet, and one of the things the holistic vet said, which should have been obvious to me from years ago, and it hadn't occurred to me or to us, was this was at that point a 9-year-old cat. He's 11 and a half now. And he said, he's as vaccinated as he needs to get. We had gotten him fully vaxxed, and he was getting his yearly boosters of everything. And this vet said to me, why? I don't know, because I'm being told to. And he said, you know, what in your life do you have to get that level of boosters of? And of course, this was, I think, the summer of 2020. It was before the COVID vaccines are out. And I, like many people who were otherwise enthusiastic about vaccines, were not so enthusiastic about the flu vaccines. It just didn't seem very, well, I don't know, at least effective, and I don't know about safe. So it's like putting that aside, which is clearly acting somewhat differently. He said, you know, you don't need a tetanus vaccine every year. The stuff that you've been vaccinated against, you don't need every year. So why should your cat? And so that at least, right? That the schedule. I don't know who writes the schedule for veterinary vaccines, but the schedule seems to be built for profit rather than for animal health and safety, and that may actually contribute to why so many, especially older animals, are experiencing so much inability to tolerate food that they could once tolerate.
Yeah, I would say, how could it be otherwise? Right? You have a system in which there's effectively no liability because you're talking about a pet. Not that, you know, if you kill a person, you're talking about potentially millions in losses. If you kill a pet, you're talking about trivial amounts so small that one could sue. Right now, okay, class action, I know it could happen, but nonetheless, in a system where the risk to companies from producing an unsafe vaccine are minimal, and in a situation where it's hard to track effects, it seems to me inevitable that unnecessary vaccines will be produced. They will end up being pushed by people with perverse incentives. That unfortunately includes veterinarians who make money on these things. For one thing, if your animal's due for a vaccine, then you have to bring your animal in to get your animal seen. So, you know,
The visit,
yeah, there's all kinds of perverse incentives.
You probably
here,
need to have their teeth cleaned while they're in there.
Yeah.
Visit, get them
Totally.
knocked out and teeth cleaned.
So, I have lots of concerns, and I've certainly seen animals become allergic to their food in a way that I don't remember ever having encountered years ago. So what the hell is going on? So I would be cautious, and I would say, as I would with a human, I would treat different vaccines differently based on how they are made, how long-standing their use is, and the seriousness of the disease if they contract it.
Yep. And with regard to limited exposure to other domestic animals, I would just say, obviously that is relevant and should be relevant, but pay attention to which diseases are also transmissible by wild animals. So something like rabies is obviously not limited to domestic animals. FIV, I think, is limited to cats, right? And so if you've got an indoor-outdoor cat and there really aren't any other cats in the area, that is a consideration that you should be including in your analysis.
Yep.
maybe a raised platform for the furry friends to lounge on camera behind you? Question mark? Oh. I like it. Love the new studio setup. Happy New Year to you both. And Happy New Year to all of you.
Thank you.
What talk have you heard about vaccine shedding routes besides through sex and breast milk? And this is sort of what I was trying to get at before.
Yeah, I mean, look, any route is plausible. Could you breathe out some component of this? Sure. Pee it out? Probably. It's got to come out somewhere. Maybe it will be so broken down that it doesn't matter.
Right.
Anyway, I would just say we are in a sufficiently novel environment with these things that one should not take anything for granted.
Yeah. Heather, where did you get your wooden laptop stand? Is in the one that you use when on your couch? I want one, can't find that model online. Put on my screen for a minute. I found it. I've had it for years, but they still make it. And here it is, Levenger, levenger.com. And it's actually on sale right now. So yeah, Levenger is tools for readers. They have lots of lovely and mostly a little bit too expensive stuff, but this one's on sale right now. So there you go. There's your answer. It's called the Nantucket Bamboo Lap Reader. Although if you go to Levenger and you just look up laptop stand, you'll get there.
There's no bamboo in Nantucket.
The whole thing is, oh. I don't know. What? Okay. A recommendation, Danger Model from Polly Matzinger provides an upgrade of self, non-self. I don't know it.
Okay. It's a textbook.
Danger Model. That doesn't really sound like a textbook so much, but it's not like a book.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, two-part question, it looks like. Bruce de Mesquita's model. A ruler's interest is to minimize the number of keys to power. Citizens are blocks, rewarded if necessary for keeping power, elderly, women, blacks, etc. The woke are amalgamating blocks. These people of color, women and minorities. My take is that's why black trans lives must matter over everyone's own interests.
I think there's something game theoretically right here.
Yeah.
It ultimately becomes unstable, right? These coalitions that are going to gather for the purpose of mutiny will ultimately tear each other to pieces.
They've already indicated an affinity for mutiny.
Yes, right.
For instance?
People who have taken on mutiny as a profession are going to end up mutinying against each other.
Indeed. It's really not that hard to predict.
Yes, there's no there there. And destroying civilization or discover that there's no there would be a shame.
I say we stop now.
All right.
Let's do it. Okay. IgG follow-up. I thought the study showed a tamped down response to spike itself. How does that translate to reduced generalized immunity?
It doesn't, except that my understanding at least is that if the variable region of this antibody, this IgG4 antibody, finds its target, that it tamps down immunity. And so that means that anything that can display that flag has the ability to send that trigger message. So the question is, are other respiratory viruses, for example, going to end up evolutionarily exploring space around that trigger? Because the closer they get to it, the greater their effectiveness. So anyway, it's not general immunity that it will be tamped down, but the question is it may be much broader than SARS-CoV-2 because we're not talking about a motif so complex that other viruses won't evolve.
All right. Yeah, don't take that, man. You gonna make any New Year's resolutions? I have one to recommend to you. Starts to recommend.
Done.
Actually, you've been better about this lately, in part because I've hidden them.
I have a perfect...
Here, I'll put it within reach and see what happens.
Fiddling is not stealing, though. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, but I mean, you were fiddling, and you recognized in yourself that you were...
That was deeply morally ingrained revulsion at the idea of stealing your pen.
Also, you're really tired of having me be on your case about where are all of my pens, why are they all gone again?
Yeah, that too, except...
I really like these pens.
They're good pens.
They're good pens. It's
Yep.
the Signo Uniball .38. Yeah, there it is.
Yes.
Just asking to be taken.
But it's such a beautifully refined pen that I disgust myself when I write with it.
What?
Because my
Disgust,
writing...
like the past tense of discuss?
No, I am
disgust.
disgusted by my writing because, you take a fine ink. You can't make a decent looking sentence with one of those.
So you definitely shouldn't steal them. You should only steal the pens that give you an excuse for not having good writing.
You're going to have to eliminate all of the other potential thieves before you know for sure that I'm still stealing them.
We don't have ferrets.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. Tesla. Okay, it might be Tesla. Yeah, he is a bit of a writer, a cryptic writer. The new studio lighting is the bomb. If I didn't know better, I'd say Heather is using more makeup than just a little powder. So apparently, Zachary, thank you. Yep, yeah. It's apparently the site, and I have caught Zachary touching the soft boxes. He likes them very much. Yeah. No, we're pleased. We got a lot more to do here, but this is good. This is good. Is the blind, unscientific code following due to the Milgram experiment effect?
Yeah, I mean, maybe more than that.
That's part of it.
Edward Bernays on top of the Milgram effect, but
Yeah.
but at the very least, yeah, they got all of the authorities to line up in their lab coats and tell us to shock the fuck out of the patient, and a lot of people did.
Yeah, like, okay.
Yeah,
I'll do it.
Pretty much that.
Oh, it's for their own good? Okay. One more question, which they want answered badly enough that they wrote it twice. The same question. How long have you two been married, and how do you both keep things fresh since you live and work together? Love your podcast. Who says we keep things fresh? Sorry, now I'm fiddling with my own pen.
Yes, and attacking your husband.
No, I didn't mean that. You know that. You didn't ask the question that way if you thought that you were going to get crazy back. We've actually, as of tomorrow is the year in which we will have been married 25 years. Not tomorrow, it's not our anniversary, that's not until August, but right? Yes.
That's
We
right.
were married in 1998. But we were together longer than that. At the point that we got married, it felt like, we've been together so long, what does it even matter? Yeah. Traveling helps.
Yes. Also, I mean,
Not being terrible to one another.
not being terrible to one another, having a sense of
for
humor about
instance.
yourself. The fact of having, it's non-stop adventure even when we don't choose it. Right?
Zap said, yeah, I don't mind it.
So, yeah.
And middle
We
zone
definitely
being
have
a
that
super
chosen.
magnet means I'm not getting solo
Nothing
super
like
bulky.
being
I'd
chased
prefer
out of your
control,
career
though.
together to
Yeah.
help you see each other in a positive light.
Yeah, but actually remember though, so yeah, I know you do. When Evergreen blew up, there was some hope. Some of it was explicitly stated that I would use this opportunity to turn on you
Yep.
by people at Evergreen.
Yep.
Yeah, and some of them thought I would.
Right. Well, this is a mistake they made across the board. They thought our students would turn on us. They thought you'd turn on me.
Yep.
And I think, it's really a very sad commentary on what their lives must be like.
Yeah.
Right? Are their friendships and their love relationships and their professor-student relationships so thin that they're going to turn on a dime on each other? Probably, but I guess they turned on us, so that tells us. But
Yeah, no, it does, and I think, I tried following that particular logic. It's not a great thing to focus on for this question because it's a lovely question and it's big and expansive and there's a lot of places we could go here. But I tried figuring out if the people who actually thought that it was actually, even if I were that sort of, even if I'd been looking for an excuse to break up our relationship with our family, and this was it, I'm then still at Evergreen, being a professor, having seen what they're willing to do to one of the other two most popular professors at Evergreen.
Well, look, no way. But I do think that they were tapping into a rule of thumb truth about the world. Most people are dissatisfied with their lives at one level or another, and that makes them buyable, right?
Purchasable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the point is exploring whether there's some deal you'd be willing to take to turn on your husband. It's insane in this context.
You get to keep most of the life that you created with him.
Right. In fact, the thing is, if you had responded positively to that invitation, you could have been a hero, right?
A hero among troglodytes.
Right, a hero, an evergreen hero.
Yes.
Right, and so the point is, as with our students, right? What did we see? We saw our students stand up in shock and horror at what was being done because it didn't make any sense to them, but to those
because they were awesome.
Right.
Because you had an actual relationship with them,
Yep.
as we have an actual relationship with one another, and.
But you can imagine. I mean, I don't want to toot our own horns, as it were, but at some level, you can imagine how many professors can you go after in that way and not have anybody take the deal, right? You don't have a disgruntled student in your class who's looking for an excuse to say, yes, racist. Well, we didn't.
Nope.
Right? So...
Yeah, and as much as the deafening silence from almost all of our colleagues was in fact deafening and destructive and eye-opening, no one stood up and said, yeah, but... I mean, and there was one hateful person who keeps trying over and over again, and she's just so perilously incompetent that no one takes her seriously. And not a supposed colleague, not a student.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, most people, there's a lot of opportunity to corrupt people because what they have isn't so good that they wouldn't accept a better offer. And I think what you're pointing to is just weird and paradoxical in light of the fact that what we were doing was real and our lives were real, and so it fell on deaf ears. But I can imagine that ploy working in other contexts with different people.
Yeah, I think so. And well, there's a lot more to go with here, but I think feel free to ask the question again if you like, and we'll riff again. Maybe that's good for now. A good way to end 2022 for Dark Horse, I think.
Hell yeah.
Don't you think? Mm-hmm. All right. We are now 8 hours from the new year here at Dark Horse, and the vast majority of you have got to be closer. If not, it's already tomorrow. It's already 2023. It's already 2023? Okay, well, how's it going?
Yeah, how is it?
Is it awesome? I hope so.
Is it safe and effective?
Until we see you next, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Happy New Year.
Everyone in that area that could have possibly have done it, including police officers, need to be looked into. Welcome back to the Shake Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Van Shake. No co-hosts, still looking for one of those. Alright, so as we said in our last podcast, we're really thinking that the Moscow police force in Moscow, Idaho, where those 4 University of Idaho students were sadly murdered, the police are either going to be really close to catching the guy or they have no clue at all. The reason why is because they're not giving any information, no suspects that they're telling the public of. Everyone apparently is cleared. No persons of interest at all. Nothing. They have no idea what exactly happened. Apparently. Recently, we put out a video on my main channel after we discussed this on my last podcast that the Moscow PD has to issue a reward, a cash reward to get the best tips possible. We said that, and I don't think the Moscow police are actually getting the best tips of specifically people who know the unsub. The unsub is not likely just someone who's, a complete loner and no one's ever really heard of him and he's living in the underground and he came up to commit these heinous crimes. Likely not. He's likely someone people know. And if people know him, then we have to be able to get out the best tips possible where people are looking at people they know and possibly turning in people they know that are acting suspicious. And that could be the unsub in this type of case. And if you saw that video and if you saw the comments, some of you wrote in the comments, or at least maybe were involved in some of those comments, that, well, it seems like the Moscow police and, the FBI, they know who he is. They're just trying to get all their ducks in a row, and they're going to get him any day now. They know who he is. As these days are passing and as the days are going where there's no arrest made, there's no information coming out, the case seems to be going quite cold. Yes, it does appear that they don't actually know. And I think a lot of where that's coming from is that some of you suspected the hoodie guy, the guy who was behind Madison and Kaylee when they were ordering food at the food truck. For the general public, he was probably the most likely suspect in this case. Makes sense because it's like, oh, okay, well, he's acting kind of weird. He was behind them. He was the last person to see them. All right, it has to be him. I mean, who else could it be? And that's the problem because Mr. Hoodie Guy was ruled out by the police. The police ruled him out. I don't know what they know. I don't know why they ruled him out, but they ruled him out. Furthermore, recently we got footage specifically from not the police, but it was leaked to the media, and I think it was by one of the parents of the children, and it was of Madison and Kaylee walking down the street with the hoodie guy. So they apparently were kind of friendly with Mr. Hoodie Guy. Not saying he couldn't have done it, but they were kind of chummy with him and kind of talking about some guy at the bar named Adam that apparently they liked and were curious if he said anything, and apparently Mr. Hoodie Guy said, oh, I told him everything. I don't know what that meant, but
Set your system's volume control for slightly above the normal listening level.
ゆっくりしたい時も盛り上がりたい時もプレミアムで止まることなくお気に入りのオーディオに浸ろう。今日も一日ハッピーに広告なしの音楽をノンストップで自由に楽しもう。プレミアムに戻ってみない？詳しくはバナーをタップ。
confirmed. confirmed. are skimming barren summits to the verdant plains. Each horizon is a new beginning. Rise and reign. Far from the fjords and the ice-cold currents, brave and soar over new frontiers. Songs and sagas of a fate determined, shields and spears. Vows of favor of the thrill of plunder, pulled together for the clan and kin. Like of hammers and the crash of thunder, pound within. Oh, 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 the echoes of eternity. Oh, 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 Valhalla calling me. Oh, 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 to love the strength of destiny. Oh, 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 Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. Sails are swaying on the crimson rivers, blood and glory in the fighting fields. Shields are shattered into splintered timbers, iron and steel. Fires are rising and the bells are ringing. Glory take us into Odin's halls. Golden river and the sound of singing as bards call.
See you next time, perhaps.
The echoes of eternity.
How can I help?
Valhalla calling me. Oh, 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 to lock the strings of destiny. Oh, 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 Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. Wind and the waves will carry me. Wind and the waves will set me free. Wind and the waves will carry me. Wind and the waves will set me free. The echoes of eternity. Valhalla calling me. To pluck the strings of destiny. Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. Ships on vigor of the waves of skimming barren summits to the verdant plains. Each horizon is a new beginning. Rise and reign. Far from the fjords and the ice-cold currents, brave and soar over new frontiers. Songs and sagas of a fate determined, shields and spears. Vows of favor or the thrill of plunder, pulled together for the clan and kin. Clank of hammers and the crash of thunder, pound within. Oh, 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 the echoes of eternity. Oh, 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 Valhalla calling me. Oh, 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 to pluck the strings of destiny. Oh, oh, Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. and rivers, blood and glory in the fighting fields. Shields that shatter into splintered timbers, iron and steel. Fires are rising and the bells are ringing. Glory, take us into Odin's halls. Golden glimmer and the sound of singing as God calls. The echoes of eternity. Valhalla calling me. To pluck the strings of destiny. Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. Wind and the waves will carry me. Wind and the waves will set me free. Wind and the waves will carry me. Wind and the waves will set me free. The echoes of eternity. Valhalla calling me. To pluck the strings of destiny. Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. Valhalla.
Spotify プレミアムはどんな聴き方にもぴったり。ダウンロードしたお気に入りの楽曲をオフライン再生して自分らしく楽しもう。ソファーでくつろぎたい時も、街中で思うままに踊りたい時も、プレミアムで音楽を満喫しよう。プレミアムにアップグレードして自由に聴こう。詳しくはバナーをタップ。
Ships on vigor of the waves are skimming, barren summits to the verdant plains. Each horizon is a new beginning, rise and reign. Far from the fjords and the ice-cold currents, brave and soar over new frontiers. Songs and sagas of a fate determined, shields and spears. Vows of favor or the thrill of plunder, pulled together for the clan and kin. Clank of hammers and the crash of thunder, pound within. The echoes of eternity. Valhalla calling me. To pluck the strings of destiny. Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me. Sails are swaying on the crimson rivers, blood and glory in the fighting fields. Shields are shatter into splintered timbers, iron and steel. Fires are rising and the bells are ringing. Glory, take us into Odin's halls. Golden glimmer and the sound of singing as God's call. The echoes is souls on the ocean's flow. Heave ho, onwards we row, forever off to new shores we go. Heave ho, onwards we row, we sail so long and so far from home. We brave the storms and the cold. From port to port on the waves we roam. We're venturesome and bold. We're heart is sold on the ocean's flow. Heave ho, onwards we row. The waves they roar and the gales they blow. Heave ho, onwards we row. No pillow soft and no lover's breast. The cold it rips through the night. We long to lay on a gentle chest and hold warm bodies tight. Where heart is sold on the ocean's flow. Heave ho, onwards we row. The sailor's labor is all we know. Heave ho, onwards we row. Our songs and our arms, they are strong over oceans and rivers we glide. Lift our sails and our hands, we will ride to new lands, many voyages on many tides. And the wind lifts our songs and our arms, they are strong over oceans and rivers we glide. Lift our sails and our hands, we will ride to new lands, many voyages on many tides. Where heart is sold on the ocean's flow. Heave ho, onwards we row, forever off to new shores we go. Heave ho, onwards we row. They taught and deceive me. Oceans of blame and rivers of shame. The fury it never leaves me. Grief in the snow, the winter of woe has come here to judge and bereave me. Lock up the rage, it rattles the cage. The fury it never leaves me.
Guardian, are you there yet?
We just arrived.
Good. The Vex are attempting another incursion. Shut them down.
Here come the Vex with a conflux. We need to get in there, or pretty soon Europa will be swarming with them. We're on it.
Guardian, are you there yet?
We just arrived.
Good. The Vex are attempting another incursion. Shut them down.
We're on it.